When I got to the next beautiful spot in my rental car, my mother-in-law called. As if she had been there the whole time, it was my wife's mom. Then I asked, "Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's up?" With a knowing look at my husband David. On the other end, her voice was crazy. "Leave David alone right now. Get your clothes and a bag and go to the bus stop by the rocks. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is going to hit you. He's hiding a gun in the car." That's the gain she was following. I can't believe David would. "Okay, I'll leave right away." Even though my answer was a little flat, it seemed to have persuaded her. She hung up right away. "My name is Emily Johnson, and I'm 29 years old. I work in an office. David and I got married last year, but because of the COVID outbreak, we only recorded our marriage. Because we've been able to travel since the plague is over, we're planning our late vacation. Our bosses were flexible and let us take time off for our vacation. We picked a national park because we wanted to take lots of pictures, even though we haven't been married in a while. David likes to edit videos for fun, while I like to take pictures of landscapes. We've even talked about making a YouTube account just for landscape movies. Since we got married, our life has been quiet but happy, but there has been one worry. Mrs. Johnson, David's mom. Her son David has always made her happy. Whenever David and I talked about getting married, she always seemed to be against me. Her sneaky advances against me in meetings happen all the time, and what's worse is that she does them without David knowing. Insidiously, she would disparage me whenever I received compliments or expressed myself during a family gathering. "Emily, did you make the stew? There's no one else like this dish around here, but it tastes good. That tastes really good. Could you tell me how to make the stew? I'd like to make it at home if it's easy. Did you enjoy it?" I'm happy. I'm going to write down the recipe right now. "That's fine, Emily, but you might also want to learn some local recipes. It will make people praise you more." It works like that most of the time. She is not complimenting my one-of-a-kind stew. Instead, she is telling me to stick to the traditional recipes and not stand out. In fact, there was a lot of snark when the family left and Mrs. Johnson and I were doing the dishes alone. A frightening woman who was always striving to stand out by preparing such a salty stew and intended to give our family hypertension or something. I took a bite. "Was it too salty for you? Next time, I'll use less salt. I no longer even want to eat your salty stew. Next time, do something more traditional." But when David comes around, she acts much differently. Uncle John told Emily, "Thanks for the stew recipe. Your dish seemed to be a hit with everyone." "Really then? That's wonderful. What do you want to eat tomorrow?" "David, Emily, and I are going to make it together." She would smile and smile her way into our talk. To change the subject, it's so obvious that it's hard to be mad about it. After that, it became kind of a joke for us. The funny part is that David already knows about her double-dealing and sly jabs. I'm always in trouble with Mrs. Johnson when her son isn't around because she thinks he doesn't see. But David, my husband, already knows her and even films or records her in secret when things get too bad. David has never liked how his mother's love is too much, which is really just too much meddling. It seems to have even crushed his hopes for the future. So when we got married, David, not me, said we couldn't live together. Even though it was a happy event, Mrs. Johnson seems to believe that I was the one who lied to him. She can't see anything around her because she loves her son too much. I'm afraid she'll do something stupid soon. Another thing is that we finally chose the details for our late trip. With our interests in mind, we chose a trip through some of the country's most beautiful spots. I'm happily getting cameras and other tools ready. David is also getting a smartphone to record movies that doesn't have a SIM card. That's why we packed a bag with clothes and toiletries. On this trip, we'll be able to see mountains and drops. I want to take beautiful pictures, so we need to check the weather forecast too. That's right. Misty and beautiful landscapes are hard to describe, but I really hope it's sunny today. As we continued to get ready, we laughed together. But Mrs. Johnson still gets in the way, even now. That was a call. Like I said, it's Mrs. Johnson. Hello, I said when I picked up the phone in front of David. I quickly put it on speakers. Hi, Kate, Emily. Are you really going to go on the trip with David? You've been married for more than a year, and now you're taking a honeymoon? What do you think? It looks like she doesn't want me to go on vacation with my husband. To deal with this, the best thing to do is show off your trip. Well, we finally don't have to follow any rules. David's business and mine have both agreed to let us take time off for our vacation, which we're going to make the most of. She took my bait and became my wife. What do you mean, have fun? It's probably just a bad trip and a cheap hotel. I feel bad for David. The things Mrs. Johnson said made David frown and keep quiet. David was the one who planned this trip, not a travel agency. I changed how I spoke after seeing David's face. No, it's not a cheap hotel at all. David set everything up. We're staying at a very fancy hotel with a great view. The food is also 5 stars, but the prices are very low. I spoke nicely on purpose to make Mrs. Johnson angry. I'm always getting picked on, and this time she was making fun of the trip that David planned. A really high-end hotel. Why do you want to go with David? I want to go on that trip. David would want to show me how thankful he is for his family. After hearing about the very fancy hotel, she couldn't keep quiet. Now she's saying she wants to go on the trip herself. This is not the kind of honeymoon that a mother would crash. It's not going to happen. It's rude to step in on your son and daughter-in-law's long-awaited vacation. We'll make sure you have a souvenir. Saying goodbye, I hung up the phone, picturing Mrs. Johnson's angry face. I laughed meanly, and when I hung up, David had his head held up in front of me. I'm sorry about my mom, Emily. She tried to ruin our holiday, which I can't believe. She probably just wanted to express her deep affection for her son, she explained. Don't be worried about it. There was a hint of worry in my voice as I smiled at David, because I was so angry at her. I beat her at her own game, but I might have failed. What would happen if Mrs. Johnson got really excited about our vacation and started bothering us? This fear of mine turned out to be right in the end. From that point on until the trip left, Mrs. Johnson didn't say a word, not even a call. I thought she would tell David bad things about me. That also didn't happen. Even though her quiet scared me, we went on our getaway as planned. David's choice of beautiful places worked out perfectly, and I was happy with the whole thing. It was the best in every way. The view, the services, the food, everything. That's why I told Mrs. Johnson how great it was. We even asked the hotel staff to take a shot of us having dinner together. David, I'm so full. Thank you so much for setting this all up, I said as I fell asleep on the hotel bed. It felt so soft and cozy on the bed. David, my husband, was very happy to see me rolling around in bed. He said, I'm glad you like it. Let's go to the spa after you've had a chance to rest. I'll look at the pictures and movies we took today while we wait. The health spa. What a wonderful place. David suddenly raised his voice. He had been opening his laptop and watching me enjoy the soft bed. I finally asked, what's going on here? When I heard something strange in David's voice, I got out of bed and looked at his computer. Our plan for today was to rent a car and get around. We parked the rental car and took pictures and movies at every beautiful place we went. In some places, you could see the rental car in the background. That wasn't a problem in and of itself, but there were times when a strange person, who looked like a small woman, was hanging out near the rental car. Even though we couldn't see her face, we thought the strange person was a small woman. The suspect was opening the car door every once in a while. Oh, look at this. Because we were only there for a short time, we didn't lock the car, David said in a low voice through the screen. I knew what kind of hat the suspicious person was wearing. Hey, this hat. Doesn't Mrs. Johnson have one like this? When I said, yes, Mrs. Johnson has a similar hat, David's face went pale. That's correct. This is my mom's hat. David and I looked at the computer screen with wide eyes. The person who seemed sketchy was putting something black into the rental car. They looked like Mrs. Johnson. She looked like she was taking something out of the trip bag that she had left in the rental car. Then, after some time, the strange person left without taking anything. Something was put in the bag for the trip. I quickly threw it out. It had a strange weight to it. I didn't notice the change in weight because the bellman carried it for us when we got to the hotel. It was a bag with clothes and toiletries in it, but nothing important. It looked like nothing was stolen. After that, a strange thing came out of the bottom of the bag. What came out shocked David and me. What is this? You're kidding me. We were both very tired when we left the hotel the next morning. Because of the amazing thing that came out of the bag the day before, we were very busy. The phone almost always rang at the exact moment we got to the next beautiful spot in the rental car. It came from Mrs. Johnson. David was on the phone, so I told him to pick up. Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's going on? The person on the other end of the phone from Mrs. Johnson sounded very upset. Get away from my kid right now. Get the bag with extra clothes in it and go to the Cape's bus stop. How does she know there's a bus stop close to the Cape where we're on vacation? What about our luggage? How does she know about things like the bag with the extra clothes? She called at just the right time, so I think she's probably hiding and watching somewhere. There were a lot of confusing parts of the call, so I asked Mrs. Johnson for a reason. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is getting ready to attack you? He has a gun hidden in the car. Oh, I see. That's the case. I pretended to follow Mrs. Johnson's lead. Even though I already knew everything, it's not possible. David is hitting me. Okay, I get it. I'm leaving now. Even though my answer was a little stiff, I think I was able to trick Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson hung up right away. I waved to David, who was driving, and then took the bag and went to the bus stop. I didn't forget to act scared, of course. After that, I called the cops. After about 5 minutes, I got to the Cape's bus stop, where an investigator in an unmarked police car met me. Well, yesterday's prediction came true. The agent looked upset and said, I never thought you'd really call it in. I'm truly sorry that I took part in this joke. Please come with me. I think David should have caught Mrs. Johnson by now. As I drove back to the rental car, the investigator followed me in his plainclothes car. Yes, I could hear Mrs. Johnson's words from where we parked the rental car. Hey, David, how did you know where I was? It looked like Mrs. Johnson had no idea that her evil plan would be found out ahead of time. My husband found her hiding in the shade of a gazebo in the parking lot and caught her. Not right now. Today, I won't forgive you. Mrs. Johnson was scared by the way her husband looked like a demon. She was even more shocked when she saw me come back with the detective. As Mrs. Johnson had planned, I had a travel bag in my hand. The moment Mrs. Johnson saw it, she yelled, Officer, arrest that woman right away. There's a gun in that bag, she says. She wants to use it to kill my son. Mrs. Johnson yelled at me in that manner, displaying a proud expression as she did so. I stood still in front of Mrs. Johnson and dumped the bag's contents on the ground. The pants were wrapped up in a small bag so that the men wouldn't be able to see them. While Mrs. Johnson looked for something, she couldn't find it. What? Where is the gun? It should be there since I put it there yesterday. Is this the gun you are looking for? The detective showed Mrs. Johnson a picture. It was a picture of a hunting gun put in a plastic bag. Upon seeing the picture the detective showed, Mrs. Johnson's face went pale. That shooting gun belonged to my late father-in-law, didn't it? Honestly, how did you manage to open the gun safe? When I found it yesterday, I thought my heart would stop. I gave it to the cops right away after calling them. Mrs. Johnson clenched her teeth and looked down when she heard my voice and the voice of my husband. Oh, Emily is to blame because it was in her bag. It has nothing to do with me. Mrs. Johnson began yelling out of panic. My husband and I both let out big sighs. The officer then came up to Mrs. Johnson with a big smile on his face. Yes, we had to ask Emily about it since it was in her bag. Yesterday was supposed to be a holiday, but we questioned her for hours. Why did you know that Emily's gun was in her room bag? Even though the detective was happy, his voice was soft. I can see why he's mad. Besides, The shooting gun was taken out without permission, even though it wasn't trained. It was in Emily's bag, though. Because Mrs. Johnson couldn't face the detective, she desperately tried to explain herself. Oh, so you saw Emily's travel preparations, but you and Emily's family are separated, aren't you? Of course, we're separated, and we haven't let her into our house for a year. When that was said, Mrs. Johnson yelled back, "Don't speak out of turn." The police officer pressed Mrs. Johnson even more. "Oh no, were you watching Emily's house? No, that's not a good thing to do. You need to go to the station with us." Mr. Johnson freaked out when she heard the detective's line, which sounded like it came straight from a police show. "No, I wasn't spying. So you can't take me against my will. I put that gun in there." Oh, she told everyone on her own. Well, I had already said it earlier when I turned the bat inside out. Before this, the detective had been happy, but now he wasn't. All right, a confession. You'll be coming with us on your own because you broke the gun rule. Mrs. Johnson was shocked when the detective spoke. What? Why? Didn't I say I wasn't spying? When Mrs. Johnson spoke out against it, her son got very angry. It makes sense, Mom. The gun your dad gave you was yours, but you don't have a shooting license. There would be no problem if the father-in-law, who had a shooting license, carried it properly for the right reason. You can't take it out of the gun safe because you don't have a shooting license. Mrs. Johnson didn't seem to know anything about gun rules or how to handle guns. I don't know how she got it this far without an accident, even though the live ammo was kept separate and not put into the gun. Even so, Mrs. Johnson still refused. But it had to be in that woman's bag when it was found at the hotel. That woman took it from my house. I'm not to blame. His mother, Mrs. Johnson, was acting badly, so her son got angry. I recorded yesterday when Mom put a gun in her rental car. Of course, I gave it to the cops. What David said made Mrs. Johnson weak in the knees. What? How? How did you learn about it? She was so angry that tears filled her eyes. I told them instead of him. Yesterday, David was recording and got a shot of the parking lot. We didn't see it at the time, but we did see it when we watched the video at the hotel. Mrs. Johnson could no longer disagree with what I said. At this point, the officer told Mrs. Johnson, who was shocked, "Now, Mrs. Kate Johnson, we'd like you to come with us to the station because we think you broke gun laws." When David said those words, Mrs. Johnson's face turned sad. "Why, David? Why is that woman better than me? Are you leaving your mom?" The detective pushed Mrs. Johnson, who was yelling, into the empty police car. "You might not want to make a fuss. When I called the house yesterday to check the gun's serial number, your son's grandma, who I think is an old woman, was very angry. As soon as the agent said that, Mrs. Johnson calmed down. That grandmother is David's grandmother. She is old, but she is still healthy and doesn't show any signs of dementia. She's pretty much in charge of the Johnson family. At this point, Mrs. Johnson is completely giving in to her. She's the head of the family, but she's not mean to other people. When I go to see my in-laws, she's always so happy to see me and calls me Emily dear. She is nice, but Mrs. Johnson has to do her jobs the right way. Her own room and bathroom were taken care of by her. What made her so mad must have been pretty tough, I said under my breath. The detective told me, "It looks like your husband's grandmother has been keeping the shooting gun as a keepsake since your father-in-law died. But the other day, the box with the memory in it was broken into. When they found out that, it caused the current fuss. Her anger was unbearable." I see. To get the key, Mrs. Johnson must have searched her whole room. I told her it's easy to see how angry she would be that her son's keepsake was broken. After handing over the rifle at the station, I asked to take a picture of it for her so she could at least keep a photograph as a memento. I said, "My husband's grandmother was mean to Mrs. Johnson. She had cried and said sorry to me and David. A family member who went to pick her up said that she yelled at Mrs. Johnson in a way that could be heard all over the neighborhood for more than 30 minutes. Oh, your grandmother really does get that mad. That's why Mom always did what Grandma said. Now everyone in the neighborhood knows what Mom did wrong," I said. Yes, thanks to his grandma's lecture, the incident became widely known, and Mrs. Johnson could no longer walk the streets. When his grandmother found out that David had broken up with her, she got permission from the police station and the prosecutor's office to send Mrs. Johnson to a farm run by a relative in the Nebraska mountains, in an area that looks like a basin. She could come back, but it would take 3 hours to get here by car. She was working so hard on the farm that she couldn't possibly get away. After some time, it turned out that I was pregnant. The family, my husband, and his grandma were all very happy. His grandmother was already excited about having a great-grandchild and started to work on making her legs stronger. My husband and her are going to fight to see who can take the baby for walks in the pram. I hope she doesn't drop the great-grandchild while holding it. She has also begun to improve the strength of her upper body. It's nice to see her getting her mood back. She was really down because of Mrs. Johnson's fuss. My husband and I are getting all of the baby stuff together today. I'd like to live with your grandmother if it's possible. She's really excited about it, and it looks like she'll live a long time following the birth, taking care of the child with grandma. I told them, we'll figure it out some way. Well, if she lives longer, I'll be happy to. My husband said, I'll talk to grandma about it. I took out the camera. I rubbed my belly and said, when the baby is born, I'm going to take lots of pictures of the baby, my husband, his grandmother, and the rest of the family.
I find solace in the understanding I share with my daughter-in-law. Following my husband's funeral, my mother-in-law, blissfully ignorant, bid me farewell with a radiant smile as she drove me away. However, the next day, panic painted her face when she visited my parents' house where I sought refuge. It was clear her scheme to secure my husband's inheritance had hit a snag. In that moment, the true gravity of ignorance struck me. My name is Emily. I'm 39, married to John, who is 2 years my junior. We have a daughter, Rose, in first grade. Living with my mother-in-law began a year ago after my father-in-law's passing. Concerned about her solitude in their spacious home, I agreed to the cohabitation. Initially, we split living expenses, offering some relief. Yet, unexpected challenges emerged as my mother-in-law started criticizing me for sharing household chores with my husband. She disapproved, asserting that it was unfit for the head of the family to engage in such tasks. Despite my role as the primary breadwinner due to a 2-year age gap with my husband, my mother-in-law remained oblivious to this fact. Frustrated, I pleaded with my husband to enlighten her about our financial dynamics, hoping to resume our shared responsibilities. However, he hesitated, revealing his reluctance to take on additional chores. Disappointed, I realized a new facet of my husband's character. Eventually, labeled a failure as a wife, I found myself shouldering all household duties alone, while my mother-in-law, a full-time housewife, remained oblivious to the imbalance. It's almost comical that she isn't fulfilling her role as a housewife, considering she should be sharing the household chores. With my husband now liberated from domestic duties, he started venturing out alone on his days off, donning casual attire despite claiming to be at work. Skepticism gnawed at me, questioning the authenticity of his purported work engagements. Moreover, on weekends, he began frequently checking his smartphone, leaving me curious about what captivated his attention. Despite my interest, he guarded his phone closely, leaving no opportunity for me to investigate. His supposed overtime hours were also inconsistent. He often returned home around the usual time or just an hour later. While suspicions of infidelity lingered, observing his routine on weekdays made me question the validity of such thoughts. A few months later, anomalies in my husband's behavior became more apparent. He had been consistent in contributing his share of living expenses, but now, instead of the customary $670, he was depositing only $600 or sometimes even $540. Perplexed, I confronted him about the financial shortfall, emphasizing my strict principles regarding money matters. With many years of marriage behind us, I expected a straightforward explanation. He nonchalantly attributed it to the company's poor performance, claiming a temporary reduction in his salary, making it challenging to meet the usual contribution. Doubtful, I pressed further, questioning whether financial cutbacks were a guise for unfaithfulness. Surprised, he vehemently denied any such betrayal, citing the presence of our family as a deterrent. While his response seemed sincere, the mystery of his weekend escapades lingered. Frustrated by the lack of clarity, I contemplated hiring a detective agency to unveil the truth. However, before I could take that step, a significant event unfolded a few days later during his work. A call from an unfamiliar number shattered the tranquility of my day. It turned out to be my husband's boss. The voice on the other end, the embodiment of concern, disclosed a distressing truth. John, my husband, had been in a traffic accident during a business errand and his life hung in the balance. The gravity of those words plunged my mind into chaos. The notion of danger to his life left me momentarily paralyzed, but soon reality snapped back. I promptly informed my boss, set aside any ongoing tasks, and rushed to the hospital, fervently wishing for his survival. Upon reaching the hospital, the devastating news awaited me. My husband had succumbed to the impact of a car collision while waiting for a green light at an intersection. Attempting to evade another vehicle that ran a red light, he stood no chance against the force of the collision. His instant demise left me grappling with an overwhelming torrent of responsibilities. Last year, I had experienced the rituals of wake and funeral preparations with the passing of my father-in-law. But then, I had my husband by my side. Now, I faced the daunting task alone. My grief-stricken mother-in-law, lost in a daze, proved incapable of offering assistance. She occasionally wandered away, seemingly seeking solace in places steeped in memories of my husband. The shock of losing both husband and son in rapid succession left her incapacitated. In the face of this tragedy, I resolved to be strong. I had to not only navigate the funeral arrangements but also prepare my daughter Rose for a future without her father. Breaking the news to Rose was an agonizing task. I explained that her father had been involved in a fatal car accident, leaving only the two of us to face the world together. Despite the uncertainty of her understanding, I felt compelled to share this harsh reality with her. As we progressed through the wake, the day of the funeral arrived, ushering in a new wave of emotions. The tension mounted, and I found myself unable to contain the flood of tears. My mother-in-law, seemingly concerned about my emotional state, approached me and uttered something utterly unbelievable. In the midst of my mourning, she callously suggested that since there was no blood relation, I should refrain from claiming John's inheritance and simply depart, leaving Rose behind. She even went so far as to question Rose's worth as my daughter, proposing that I take her when I leave. Her laughter accompanying these heartless words added an extra layer of shock. Struggling to comprehend such cruelty amid my grief, I decided to maintain composure until the funeral concluded and distance myself from my mother-in-law's callous remarks. Her smirking face lingered in my memory, fueling a desire for some form of retribution. Post-funeral, I meticulously prepared to depart, packing only the essentials for Rose and me. I approached my mother-in-law and declared my renouncement of any claim to John's inheritance, offering it to her without hesitation. Her face lit up with joy at the prospect, expressing relief and gratitude for my supposed understanding. She eagerly agreed, seemingly content with the arrangement, and happily retreated to her room, signaling the end of our association. As we left the house, I couldn't fathom the newfound happiness she exuded. Despite our initial decision to live together due to her loneliness, she now appeared content with our departure. The reasons for her joy remained elusive to me. Upon reaching my parents' house, I recounted the entire ordeal to my father, who was understandably outraged. He condemned my mother-in-law's actions, deeming her concern for inheritance immediately after John's death despicable. Concerned about our financial stability without the inheritance, my father pondered our future. However, I assured him that we would manage without it, having handled expenses on my salary alone for the past month or two. Expressing his concern for Rose's future and the importance of saving, my father generously offered us a place to live. Grateful, I accepted his kindness. Regarding my husband's inheritance, I revealed a document to my father that had recently arrived from my in-laws' house. A report titled John's Conduct Investigation. It contained shocking revelations about my husband's true nature. As I spent time at my parents' house on John's bereavement leave, contemplating our next steps, the doorbell incessantly rang. Irritated by the persistent ringing, I opened the door to find my mother-in-law looking pale and agitated. Confused by her sudden change in demeanor, I responded through the intercom, urging her to stop shouting. Her outburst about my knowledge of John's substantial debt disturbed the neighbors. Reluctantly, she acquiesced to a quieter conversation, but her unexpected visit begged the question. What did she want after proclaiming just the day before that we should no longer be in contact? I responded with cold detachment, stating that it concerned John's inheritance and suggested continuing the conversation inside. However, my mother intervened, adamantly refusing entry to someone who had callously told my grieving daughter to leave during a funeral. Concerned about shielding Rose from the discussion, I concurred with my mother's decision. Unyielding, my mother-in-law insisted on finding an alternative, leading us to agree to talk at a nearby cafe. Once at the restaurant, my mother-in-law wasted no time delving into the discussion. She accused me of leaving the house easily because I knew John was drowning in debt. I confirmed her suspicion, citing John's weekend work claims, perpetual smartphone proximity, and his sudden halt in contributing to living expenses as red flags. To clarify, I hired a detective agency that revealed his gambling addiction and mounting debts, information I learned just 2 days prior. Addressing her concern about my tears at the funeral, I admitted genuine sorrow for the loss but acknowledged that, considering everything, leaving was the right decision. Intrigued, she questioned the total amount of John's debt. Startled, I revealed a demand letter I received that day, a staggering $6,700, contributing to a grand total of $33,700 in debt. I warned her that unless she renounced the inheritance, she'd be burdened with the entire sum. Dismayed by the revelation, my mother-in-law stuttered, confessing that the inheritance from her husband was already spent, $13,500 on luxury items, anticipating John's inheritance. This expenditure explained her post-funeral shopping sprees. Realizing her financial recklessness, I acknowledged my inability to assist with her debt and urged her to handle the renunciation herself. I left, and in subsequent events, she managed to renounce John's negative inheritance, but the $13,500 debt remained. Attempts to seek help from relatives failed due to the rumors of her actions on the day of the funeral. In contrast, life for Rose and me took a positive turn. Despite Rose transferring schools, she embraced her new environment energetically. Living with my parents allowed me to focus on work, providing a stable income. We now spend quality weekends together, exploring shopping malls, visiting theme parks, and enjoying activities we couldn't during John's lifetime. Supported by my loving parents, our days are filled with smiles, and I am determined to sustain this newfound happiness.
Why does this unattractive girl still reside in her parents' house? It's quite bothersome. Could you kindly vacate the premises immediately? You clearly don't belong here. Pack your things and return to your parents' house. About a month after my husband passed away, I found myself living with and caring for my mother-in-law. These harsh words were directed at me by 2 individuals. Did I do something wrong? I've been contributing by paying $3,000 a month for rent. However, if they view me as a nuisance, I'll leave the house as they wish. A month later, an apology came from my mother-in-law, tears streaming down her face. But apologies alone won't resolve the issue. I decided to share a surprising fact with her. It had been a year since I married her son, and we have been living in their house. My husband and I shared a love for camping and outdoor activities, quickly bonding and leading to our marriage. Now I was taking care of my mother-in-law, who had been alone since my father-in-law's passing. Her initial animosity turned into gratitude, and we built a genuine parent-child bond. My husband and I had a decent income, and we were giving her $3,000 a month as rent. Despite this, financial troubles arose. My sister-in-law, who didn't live with us, began making frequent demands for money. I intervened when she asked for financial help, suggesting ways to cut expenses instead. My husband, realizing the need for his sister to become more self-reliant, firmly advised her to stop depending on their parents. This created a rift, but my sister-in-law reluctantly changed her behavior regarding money matters. Since my father-in-law's passing, my mother-in-law had been more lenient with money, often granting her children's requests. However, it became apparent that my sister-in-law was exploiting this generosity, demanding larger sums of money. Taking charge of the family's finances, my husband managed the situation. One day, as I went to work, he wasn't feeling well and had gone to the hospital in the morning. At first, I believed it was just a common cold, but during lunch, my husband called, revealing that it wasn't just a cold. They had discovered cancer. The tests indicated that it was quite advanced, and I was told I had approximately a year left to live. His shocking words rendered me speechless, and panic set in as my thoughts froze. After standing still for a while, reality hit me hard, and I rushed to the hospital where my husband was. At that time, my husband still had enough strength to converse normally, but as the treatment continued, his strength diminished. After 6 months, he could hardly talk. 7 months later, struggling to breathe, my husband tried to convey something important to me. The content of his words was surprising and left me in shock. I spent several days absorbed in those thoughts, but a week later, my husband passed away. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't grasp what was happening. However, after his passing, I was busy with a funeral week and settling his affairs. Days passed, and just when I thought I could finally start coming to terms with my husband's death, an unexpected incident occurred. I have something to talk about. Is now a good time? My sister-in-law asked. Of course. What would you like to talk about? How much did you hear from my brother? Actually, I heard that a spot opened up in a very popular nursing home that's hard to get into. Why don't we consider admitting Mom there? My brother is no longer here, and taking care of that old lady must be a hassle for you, right? My sister-in-law's smirk about this topic made my heart clench. To bring up such a topic right after my husband's death, but looking into her eyes, I could tell she was serious. This house is too big for just that old woman. Don't you think it's a waste if my family and I live here? You can live alone without any worries. I think it's the best choice for everyone. While my sister-in-law didn't say it explicitly, her remarks gave the impression that she had been eagerly awaiting my husband's death. The way she trivialized my husband's death and her disdainful attitude towards my mother-in-law, I couldn't tolerate it anymore. I appreciate your suggestion, but I have no intention of doing such a thing. I plan to continue living with my mother-in-law, taking my husband's place. When I firmly declined, my sister-in-law left the house in a bad mood. Originally, it seemed she viewed my mother-in-law as a convenient source of money, so her attitude was not surprising. However, I was honestly shocked by her blatant actions. Nonetheless, I had no intention of letting my sister-in-law have her way, nor did I plan to put my mother-in-law in a nursing home. But an event a week later shook my resolve. Upon returning from work, I found my mother-in-law glaring at me angrily, and my sister-in-law smirking beside her. I'm disappointed in you. I want you to leave this house. How dare you plan to put someone in a nursing home without consulting? What are you trying to do, take over the house? No, that's not my intention. What do you mean? Why don't you just be honest? It was your proposal, wasn't it? You said to put Mom in a nursing home and sell this family home, and suggested we split the sale proceeds, didn't you? I never said such a thing. Shocked by this unexpected betrayal, I struggled to speak, but managed to express my thoughts. I was genuinely taken aback, completely unprepared for such forceful tactics just because things weren't going her way. The pain and sadness enveloped me as my mother-in-law looked down on me as if I were worthless. I don't consider you family anymore. Please leave this house right now. She shouted at me with rage on her face. It seemed my mother-in-law had no intention of listening to me. Understood. If that's what you want, I'll leave as you wish, I responded. Perhaps my sister-in-law had influenced her. But this was a clear betrayal for me, as I had decided to continue caring for my mother-in-law in place of my husband. I quickly packed my things and decided to return to my parents' home. I needed to find a new place to live and had a lot to do, but being kicked out by my mother-in-law deeply hurt me, so I decided to rest at my parents' home for a while. About a month later, my sister-in-law accused me of withdrawing money from our parents' account without permission. Is that you? You withdrew money from our parents' account without permission, didn't you? Why is there not a single dollar left in the account? Don't say such ridiculous things. Are you calling me a thief now? Pretending you don't know. If you keep doing this, I'll get the police involved. Come to our parents' house right now. After saying this, my sister-in-law abruptly hung up the phone. Caught in someone's conspiracy and now being accused of theft. I had had enough. I had anticipated issues with the mortgage of the family home. There must still be several years of mortgage payments left unpaid. Honestly, I didn't have the time or energy to deal with my sister-in-law. I wanted to cut ties, but I had reasons why I couldn't. There was still a truth I had to reveal. With a heavy heart, I immediately headed to my in-laws' home. Just like the day I left, my mother-in-law glared at me, and my sister-in-law was there too, giving me the same look. Did he steal money from the house or withdraw it from the account? I don't know, but give it back quickly. You both were working, right? So, there must be a significant balance, right? What are you talking about? There's nothing left of my father-in-law's inheritance. We've been covering all the living expenses and rent. Do you think the inheritance would cover everything? What, really? My words left my sister-in-law looking at my mother-in-law in surprise. It was clear that there was an understanding between the two. My mother-in-law knew that we had been financially supporting the family home, but she probably thought that my father-in-law's inheritance was sufficient for a while. However, the actual situation was quite different. Maybe in this situation, isn't my mother-in-law the victim? Mother-in-law, it was your daughter who was misusing father-in-law's inheritance, wasn't it? At that moment, my mother-in-law's expression changed dramatically. There was an air of confusion, as if she couldn't grasp what I was saying. But I never lied to deceive others. The attitude of my sister-in-law made it clear that what I was saying was true. Her expression changed the moment the inheritance was mentioned, even though she had been glaring at me sharply before. I've seen through the schemes you've been plotting and the misdeeds you've been committing. Actually, my husband revealed to me that since we started living together, he took over managing the household finances. He noticed a significant decrease in the inheritance supposed to be received by my mother-in-law, and he found it abnormal. Moreover, my sister-in-law's frequent and unusual financial requests seemed suspicious to him, so he confronted her. It turned out she had withdrawn cash from the inheritance without any permission. She was actually stealing. Wait, is that true? My sister-in-law stammered in confusion the moment I revealed the truth. My mother-in-law's anger immediately turned towards her. It seemed my mother-in-law hadn't realized the money was gradually decreasing, as she had been living modestly since my father-in-law's passing and never paid much attention to finances. My husband, being in accounting, was aware of even minor financial changes. This misdeed came to light when he confronted my sister-in-law. Yet, for my mother-in-law, her daughter remained precious, leading my husband to keep it a secret under the promise of repayment. The reason my husband sternly stopped her from borrowing money from my mother-in-law was because of this. I only learned about this a few days before my husband passed away. It was truly surprising, but it seems to be the truth. To steal someone else's money, even if they are family. What were you thinking? Can't you differentiate between what's right and what's wrong? My mother-in-law berated my sister-in-law. Stop making excuses, you thieving cat. Her face became increasingly red with anger, as if she was about to burst a blood vessel. Although not someone who clung to money, she had a strict moral compass, especially harsh on acts of malice and betrayal. Her decision to disown me, seeing my act of sending her to a nursing home as a betrayal, was also based on these values. These values applied not just to me, a non-blood relative, but also to her own daughter. However, I had more to reveal. Also, the large amount of money you got by betraying your family was used for gambling, right? Huh? Wait a minute. What are you talking about? My sister-in-law feigned ignorance. I've investigated everything. You'll understand if you look at these. I showed them several photos from an envelope. Pictures secretly taken by my deceased husband, clearly capturing my sister-in-law entering and exiting a casino. Your husband works for a foreign company, and you should be financially comfortable. My husband always wondered why you were so desperate for money. The investigation unexpectedly revealed your gambling addiction. Tell me, how enjoyable was it to gamble with someone else's money? What is this? This is called stalking. This is no joke. You're calling others thieves, and now this. And there's something else I need to tell you, mother-in-law. It was your daughter who suggested sending you to the nursing home. You know what? Finally, I've reached this point. It's time to reveal everything and then bring this to a close. My sister-in-law's true nature, previously unnoticed, was revealed through this incident. This should make my mother-in-law realize that blaming me was a mistake. Additionally, my mother-in-law was also manipulated by my sister-in-law's schemes. With the truth out, she should understand my position. I'm not sure if this will be conclusive evidence, but I want you to see this. I said, presenting my mother-in-law with the text messages between me and my sister-in-law. The history showed my sister-in-law sending me numerous links and nursing home suggestions, serving as evidence of her scheming. Were you really planning to abandon your own mother? That's not it. It's all a misunderstanding. Please just listen to my side of the story. My sister-in-law pleaded. It seems you plan to kick my mother-in-law out and live here with your family, right? This house isn't that old. It's still perfectly livable. Who was it that was thinking only of themselves, trying to take everything? Can you think about it calmly for a moment? As I spoke, my mother-in-law seemed to grasp the situation. She then looked at me sadly, as if she knew what she did was wrong, and turned her angry voice towards my sister-in-law. How selfish can you be to repay kindness with betrayal after all this time thinking of you as family? How do you see me? Don't mock me. Wait, just listen. There's a huge reason for this. At that moment, a loud noise echoed from the hallway, and footsteps followed as my sister-in-law's husband entered the room. Sorry I'm late. Got caught in traffic. It's okay. Oh, mother-in-law, I hadn't told you yet, but I asked him to come. I left the house key open so he could enter any time. Surprised by the sudden appearance of my sister-in-law's husband, both were taken aback. I explained the situation, and they quickly understood this issue wasn't just between me and my mother-in-law. It also affected my sister-in-law's husband. My sister-in-law's husband could easily access his salary and savings, raising further suspicions as she had been embezzling my mother-in-law's money. I had spoken to him in advance and arranged for him to hear the conversation via phone. I've been listening from the start. Enough with the excuses. Just admit your mistakes already. That's despicable. But what you've done is a serious crime. I was shocked when I checked the bank account earlier. It was a big mistake to let you manage our finances. The atmosphere froze in an eerie silence due to the incredible anger of my sister-in-law's husband. Having said all I wanted to say, I decided not to intervene further and just silently watched my sister-in-law's husband lecture her. His reprimands were so intense that it made me tremble just watching, but I didn't feel bad for her at all. I only thought about ensuring she repays the money, and that she shouldn't assume this would be the end of it. The lecturing continued for a while, and eventually, she knelt down to apologize to both me and my mother-in-law before leaving. According to my sister-in-law's husband, he had left the management of their household finances entirely to her, thinking they were saving and increasing their savings by cutting back on expenses. However, it turned out she was gambling away all the money saved. As her gambling intensified, she eventually incurred debts on her credit cards and began stealing money from my mother-in-law to pay it off. The total amount she owes from various sources is now more than what she has stolen from her husband and mother-in-law. Her husband, upon learning about this, decided to divorce her but plans to make her work to repay the full amount for the money she stole and the child support she misused. Until then, he had no intention of divorcing her and was constantly monitoring her behavior, hoping for her to change herself. It seems tough days are ahead for my sister-in-law. Later, my mother-in-law apologized to me for the misunderstanding, and we still meet for tea about once a month. Now that my husband has passed away, I want to maintain a good relationship with her, the mother who gave birth to him, and support her to the end.
I'm staying over tonight. Can you make room for all of us? Wait a minute. I already told you, I have plans to go see a play tonight, and it'll be late when I get back. That's why I said we'd all stay here. When her son wasn't home, his mom showed up unexpectedly with 7 friends. I hadn't been told about this visit and I had my own plans, so I tried to say no. But you'll be back soon, right? We'll just leave our stuff here and go out for a while. Could you get dinner ready and set up places for us to sleep? She acted like she didn't care about my situation and acted as if everything was already arranged. To make things worse, I noticed the necklace she was wearing. I had put up with her rude behavior for a long time without saying anything, but this was too much. I can't. I'm leaving for a trip right now. What? You're going on a trip? Who's going with you? My unexpected refusal surprised her. I had finally reached my breaking point after enduring her constant nagging. Please give me back that necklace. It was time for my mother-in-law to face the consequences of her actions. My name is Michelle Gorman, and I'm a 30-year-old housewife. After I got married, I used my experience in administration to become a computer class instructor. My husband, Mike, is busy every day as the president of his father's company. Sometimes he seems lost in thought, but it makes me happy to see him relaxed, especially when we go on our favorite movie dates. I feel better when I'm with you, he often says. I'm glad if I can make his life a little easier. I wish I could offer him advice or suggestions, but I've always found it hard to speak up. Since I was young, I've preferred listening to others rather than talking about myself. My older brother, who's 4 years older than me, has always looked out for me. I used to dislike that about myself, but thanks to Mike's support, I've started to gain some confidence. Mike has an older brother who works as the vice president in their father's company. His wife, Mindy, is around my age, and we get along great. She's focused on her career, reliable, and kind. I admire how she stands up for herself and shares her opinions, yet she's also understanding and flexible. Watching her stand up to the mother-in-law was really impressive. Unfortunately, they live far away, so I don't get to see them often, which I regret. On the other hand, the mother-in-law acts like she's the daughter of the company president, always confident, but her stubbornness and arrogance are clear. Michelle, you're Mike's wife, the president. You should quit your job as a computer instructor and fully support your husband, she'd say, putting a lot of pressure on me. Mike would support me, but she'd still be unhappy. Sometimes I was glad we lived apart. I just wanted a peaceful life with Mike and hopefully children someday. But then Mike's father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. It was a shock for everyone, and Mike and his brother had to figure out what to do with the family company. Mike decided to stay in New York for a while. I went back home and waited for Mike's updates. With the extra responsibilities on both of them, I was worried. After talking with his brother, they decided that Mike would move to the company's main office in New York. His brother became the new president and Mike became the vice president. We looked for a house in New York and found a nice one that was already built. It was a bit far from the train station, but it was in a quiet area, which felt safe. The house had lots of sunlight, so it seemed like we'd have a comfortable life there. Since Mike had to work late because of all the changes at work, I made sure our home was cozy so he could relax and prepared healthy lunches for him. I wanted to do everything I could to support him. And just like that, a month went by. "I'm back. I'm starving," Mike said. "Thanks for working so hard." "I'll make dinner," I replied. "Thanks. Hey Michelle, my mom wants to visit this weekend. Is that okay?" I was worried that she might be feeling lonely since Mike's dad passed away, so I was glad to hear this. "Of course. We still have some things to tidy up, but she's welcome," I said. "Thanks. I'll tell her." "Oh, maybe I should ask my brother and his wife to join too," Mike suggested. "Yeah, that's a great idea," I replied. It might sound strange, but moving here meant I could see Mindy, my sister-in-law, more often, which was a nice surprise. That weekend, we all got together to talk about what had been happening and share memories of my father-in-law. It's sad that Dad's gone, but I didn't want to stay sad forever, so I started a new hobby, my mother-in-law said with a smile. She always looked elegant, wearing beautiful dresses and nice jewelry. Today, she looked stylish with a light purple scarf that stood out. She seemed to have lost some weight, but she was still firm when giving advice to Mike and his brother about the company. But since my father-in-law passed away, I noticed she was being stricter with me. "Michelle, we're running out of drinks. Can you go buy some?" she asked. "Jessica, I can go get them," Mindy offered. "Oh, can you? That would be really helpful," she said, sounding more demanding towards me than she did towards Mindy. I thought maybe she was struggling with the loss of her husband, so I decided to let her comments go for a while and just watch. After dinner, Mike drove everyone home, and the night was over. Since then, my mother-in-law started coming to our house a lot. She started criticizing how I kept the house and complaining about Mindy, and she started going through our fridge without asking, which surprised me. "Michelle, Mike is so busy right now. You should pay more attention to the meals you make for him. What if he gets sick too?" "Yes, I'll be more careful. And there's still trash here. Can't you clean up properly?" "I'm sorry." It kept going like this. It felt like she was just finding things to criticize about me to pass the time. But whenever Mindy came over, she'd leave quickly, saying she had other things to do. She said it wasn't because she didn't like me, but I felt differently. Maybe she found it easier to boss me around, since I hardly ever argued back, than to do the same to Mindy, who always spoke her mind. I thought about getting a job to spend less time at home. But even after I found one, my mother-in-law's harassment got worse. "Michelle, we're out of barbecue sauce at our place, so get some while you're out. I brought some leftovers with me, so I'll take them." Her boldness sometimes left me speechless. She could easily afford to buy fancy ingredients from a fancy store. Then something happened. A necklace that was very special to me disappeared. It was a keepsake from my mother, and I always kept it safe on a shelf in my room. The only person who came to mind was my mother-in-law, since she visited often. Even though I didn't want to suspect her, she often looked around our house and probably knew where most things were. Despite searching everywhere, I couldn't find it, so I decided to ask her about it. That's when she exploded with anger, yelling, "You probably lost it yourself. How dare you accuse me? What kind of person are you?" "I'm sorry, I searched everywhere I could think of, but I couldn't find it. It's a special keepsake from my mother, and it means a lot to me." More than feeling angry about being accused, I was devastated about losing something so precious from my mom, and tears started to fall. "I don't care. It's just a necklace. Why don't you just ask Mike to buy you a new one?" "It's not about getting a new one." I realized she wouldn't understand my feelings. I decided not to talk about it anymore. But then money from my wallet and other things around the house started disappearing. Even though I kept an eye on my mother-in-law, I never saw her take anything. Confused and tired of it all, I talked to Mindy about it. She said my mother-in-law was definitely the main suspect because no one else had access to our home. It made me sad to think that, but there wasn't any solid proof. I couldn't understand why she would do this, especially since she still had lots of money from my father-in-law's inheritance. Seeing how upset I was, Mindy had an idea. Little did I know where it would lead. About 2 weeks after talking to Mindy, I was getting ready for a trip. "I'm heading out, Michelle. Just relax and enjoy your time," Mindy said. "Take care," I replied. Mike and his brother were going on a business trip to meet with a company from another state. Mindy suggested I take a break too and invited me on a short vacation. I'd been feeling really drained lately, so the idea of getting away sounded nice. I packed early and left my travel bag by the door, ready to go. Then the doorbell rang. I wondered who it could be, so I checked the video feed and saw my mother-in-law. But she wasn't alone, she had a bunch of friends with her. "Hi, Michelle. I brought some friends. Can you let us in?" Opening the door, I saw my mother-in-law and about 7 of her friends, all carrying big bags. Were they planning to stay here? "We're staying over tonight. Make us feel comfortable." "Excuse me? Didn't I mention it? We're going to see a play nearby tonight, and since it ends late, we decided to stay here," she said casually. This was news to me, especially since my departure time was approaching. "Oh, did I inconvenience you? Jessica told me you were okay with it." I hadn't heard anything like that, and it seemed like she was making up excuses. Feeling more and more frustrated, I responded firmly. "I'm sorry, but I wasn't told about this, and I already have plans." She looked surprised by my answer. "But you'll be back soon, right? We'll just drop our bags and go out for a while. Can you make dinner and set up beds for us?" Ignoring my plans, she seemed to think everything was already arranged. "I can't. I'm going on a trip." "A trip? Who with?" "With Mindy." "Oh, just with Mindy? You can go anytime. We've come all this way just for today. How long are you going to make us wait?" she pressed, disregarding my plans. Then I noticed something glinting around her neck. "Wait, that necklace you're wearing." To my astonishment, it was the same necklace that was a precious memento from my mother. "Jessica, where did you get that necklace?" "Why, it's just one of my collections. Is there a problem?" she replied with a smug look. "That can't be right. That necklace is rare and limited edition." While I was talking to her, Mindy arrived. "I was wondering why you didn't show up at our meeting place and didn't contact me. So this is what was happening." "I'm sorry I couldn't get in touch, Mindy." Seeing my expression, Mindy instantly knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" "I got upset because the necklace she's wearing is the same one that belonged to my mother, which recently went missing." "Of the one you kept in that box." Mindy said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. Suddenly, my mother-in-law, trying to keep it from her friends, whispered to us, "Can you two stop this? It's embarrassing." "Do you want to accuse me of theft?" "Yes, I find it suspicious," Mindy answered firmly. "Do you have any proof that I stole it? It's embarrassing to have such unreasonable daughters-in-law. Please don't make a scene in front of my friends." With that, she turned back to her friends with a smile. "Well, let's go inside, everyone." As she tried to move inside, I remembered something. The initials. My mother's initials are engraved on the necklace. "Jessica, can I have a look, please?" Mindy quickly went behind her to check. "Enough of this. What's your mother's name?" "It's Kate Young, so the initials should be Ki." "There it is, the initials Ki," I said, pointing out the engraving. The friends looked horrified and stepped back. "Stop this. I didn't come here for this. Let's go, everyone," my mother-in-law insisted. "We're not letting you leave," Mindy said firmly. The friends, sensing the tension, quickly muttered, "We're not involved," and hurried towards the subway. "Wait, there's been some mistake." My mother-in-law tried to follow her friends, but someone stopped her. "What are you doing here? Weren't you supposed to be on a business trip?" Standing there was Mike. It turned out his business trip was actually scheduled for the next day. He had deliberately given his mother a false date to investigate her actions. Mindy had told Mike about the missing items from our house after I talked to her. At first, Mike was unsure, but after visiting his childhood home and seeing similar items to ours, he began to suspect theft. However, without evidence, he knew she could easily deny it, so he came up with today's plan. Inviting friends for an overnight stay was unexpected, but he was sure his mother would come if she thought he wasn't home. "What are you doing here?" Mike demanded. "I was just leaving," my mother-in-law said as she tried to go, but I stopped her. "Give it back. That necklace isn't yours. It's a keepsake from my parents. Why do you have it, Mom?" I demanded. "It's not what you think. I found it in my purse. Michelle must have set me up," she claimed, suddenly shifting the blame to me, seemingly fearing she was in trouble. "Do you really think such a lie would work? There's no way Michelle would do something like that. First, give the necklace back to Michelle." "We'll talk after that," Mike said firmly. Reluctantly, she took off the necklace, threw it on the ground, and tried to run away. "Hey, wait!" We tried to chase her, but stopped shortly after. We didn't need to anymore. "Huh? I was taken aback as 10 police officers stood in front of my mother-in-law. I was unsure about what was happening, just staring at the bizarre scene. Then one of the officers spoke up. We received a report from a local resident. They said someone who seemed to be causing a disturbance here was often seen entering this house when the owners were away. They asked us to come quickly. What are you talking about? I'm the mother of the son living here. Getting the police involved in a family matter? My mother-in-law retorted, looking annoyed. Wait, what do you mean she entered when we weren't home? I never did such a thing, I interjected. I always come when you're home. Did the informant say anything else? When we asked the police, they mentioned that someone had witnessed my mother-in-law sneaking into our backyard, likely using a spare key to get inside. Indeed, we had a spare key hidden beneath a plant pot in the backyard. This realization gave us chills and also explained the missing items. Mike had considered this possibility and was planning to observe her actions while we were out today, but he never expected to find out the truth in this manner. Mom, why were you coming into our house when we weren't home? It's all lies. You're going to believe some unknown person's story, she retorted. But you did have my precious necklace, didn't you? I pressed. I told you I found it in my purse, my mother-in-law insisted. One of the officers stepped in, saying calmly, let's talk about this at the station. But I didn't do anything. Mike, say something, she pleaded. Mom, stop this. I can't understand why you did this, Mike said firmly. Upon hearing her son's words, my mother-in-law collapsed to the ground. But just when it seemed like she had nowhere left to run and was feeling defeated, she suddenly flew into a rage. Because after your father passed away, I felt so lonely, and seeing her always so cheerful, I couldn't stand it. I felt better seeing her troubled. I wanted her to feel the pain I felt, she shouted. Mike was red-faced hearing her irrational reasoning. Mike, wait, let me speak, I said, feeling the need to confront the issue head-on. I stepped in front of an increasingly angry Mike. I understand where you're coming from, Jessica. Perhaps I've been neglectful by always brushing off our talks. However, stealing is a different matter entirely. Did you want to upset me? Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. Did you find joy in pushing someone to their limits with such a twisted and dirty scheme? Did that fill the void of your loneliness? I asked, trying to understand her actions. Shut up. What do you know about me? She snapped back defensively. If you're feeling down, then tell us. We can't read minds, I said, trying to reason with her. Don't make fun of me. Why would I tell you anything, you worthless daughter-in-law? She lashed out. Mom, Michelle's right, Mike intervened firmly. Seeing that the situation wasn't progressing, the police stepped in, suggesting they move to the station. Are you really going to take me in? I can't believe this, she protested. Despite her resistance, given the eyewitness accounts of the unlawful entry and a suspicion of theft from possessing my belongings, the police decided to question my mother-in-law, and so she was promptly arrested on charges of unlawful entry and theft. She continued to protest her innocence, demanding a lawyer and refusing to eat the food provided. During a visit from her father, he expressed his anger and urged her to deeply reflect on her actions. This stern admonition prompted a change in her demeanor as she tearfully apologized. Despite her typically carefree nature, her father's authority seemed to be the only one she wouldn't challenge. He warned her that unless she genuinely reflected on her behavior, she shouldn't expect to have a home to return to. Reluctantly, she appeared to accept the reality of her situation. Perhaps the loss of her husband had left my mother-in-law searching for her place in the world. Were her expensive clothes and jewelry merely a shield to protect herself? I even began to wonder if her differing treatment of me and my sister-in-law was just a facade to conceal her vulnerabilities. However, her excessive desires and inability to control them were a separate issue. It was clear that making wrong judgments had led to this unfortunate incident. I was shocked to see the situation escalate to such a degree, especially realizing that my mother-in-law had been using a spare key to enter our house without our knowledge. It genuinely terrified me to think about the potential dangers of someone entering our home without permission. Later, I discovered that the couple living diagonally across from us had reported her. The wife, who works from home, had noticed my mother-in-law entering our yard suspiciously multiple times and found it concerning. I'm incredibly grateful for their courageous actions. Since then, we've been enjoying a peaceful life. To ensure our safety, we changed our locks and stopped hiding a spare key in the yard. Mike decided to cut ties with his mother and made her promise not to contact us again. He warned of legal action if she attempted to do so. After her release, she returned to her rural childhood home and reportedly adopted a more modest lifestyle. A significant change from her previous lavish ways. Under the watchful eye of her father, she now helps around the house from early morning. I sincerely hope she takes this opportunity to reflect on her past behaviors. Meanwhile, my own father has moved in with us as a precaution against any further unexpected visits from my mother-in-law. He's here to ensure my safety. But there's another reason he's with us. I'm currently expecting our first child. The anticipation of becoming grandparents, coupled with the support of Mike, fills me with a sense of warmth and determination. While material possessions can bring temporary satisfaction, it's the presence of loved ones that truly enriches our lives. As we discuss our living arrangements surrounded by our dear ones, we are committed to preserving the peace and happiness of our daily lives. But
My name is Rachel, and currently, I reside in an annex of my in-laws' house with my husband, Stefan. While Stefan lives in the main house with his parents, I am the sole occupant of the annex. Originally, this annex was a small structure built by Stefan's grandfather as a personal project to create a private space. Over time, it has been converted into a living space approximately the size of a room, thanks to my efforts. Initially, Stefan and I lived in a regular apartment for about 3 years after our marriage. However, his parents, who greatly adore him, suddenly expressed their desire to live with Stefan. In response, Stefan, as the dutiful son, declared that he also wanted to be with his parents. Witnessing their emotional reaction, including tears and embraces, I found myself taken aback by the heartfelt scene. Stefan and I first crossed paths at work, where he was my direct subordinate when he joined the company midway through his career. We became a couple after 3 years of dating. Throughout that dating period, he resided at his parents' house. It appears that this prolonged stay fostered a sense of homesickness in both Stefan and his parents. Stefan, who had been pampered at home, seemed to have never been involved in any household chores. After our marriage, when I suggested sharing housework, he appeared reluctant, stating that he had never done any housework before. The problematic aspect was that, despite my intention to divide the chores between us, Stefan seemed to have never considered participating in household tasks himself. I sensed a pattern in all of this. Whenever I attempted to involve him in household chores, Stefan would feign interest for a brief moment, grow disinterested, and eventually say, "This isn't for me. You're better at this, Rachel. You should keep doing it." Both of us were employed, and given my higher position at work, I felt a greater need to share the household responsibilities. However, encouraging him to help often proved to be more time-consuming than handling everything myself. It reached a point where I found it less troublesome to manage everything alone. The dynamics shifted when I transitioned to remote work. Stefan, seemingly surprised to find me at home every day, initially understood the change. He stopped complaining about my altered lifestyle, or so I thought. It became apparent later that he hadn't fully grasped the implications of my decision. Several years into my remote work, Stefan's parents suddenly visited our apartment, expressing a desire to live with him. Witnessing their emotional reunion, I felt a sense of isolation and bewilderment. Eventually, with Stefan's wish to be with his parents, we made the decision to move into their house. Stefan consistently chose locations close to his parents, whether it was for renting an apartment or selecting a job. For me, remote work made the location irrelevant, but his choices required us to uproot ourselves and quit our jobs. Upon settling into his parents' house, Stefan's mother expressed gratitude, saying, "Thank you for taking care of Stefan all this time. From now on, I will take good care of Stefan. Rachel, please take care of everything else." Initially, I interpreted this as a relief from doing housework for Stefan, but soon I realized her intentions were different. My mother-in-law's tasks involved preparing special meals exclusively for Stefan, meticulously laundering only his clothes, ensuring his shoes and belongings stayed immaculate, and purchasing various items specifically for him. As for all other household chores, those for Stefan's parents and myself, including cooking and laundry, were now solely delegated to me despite my ongoing commitment to work. Now, I found myself burdened with the responsibility of not only managing household chores for Stefan's parents and myself, but also maintaining the cleanliness of the larger family house. The prospect left me disheartened. Despite my efforts, this cohabitation seemed to bring happiness only to Stefan and his parents, with no apparent benefits for me. In fact, it felt like my burdens had increased. During one cleaning session, my father-in-law approached me with a request. He looked apologetic as he explained, "Rachel, I have a favor to ask. Could you contribute some money?" Confused, I inquired further. He elaborated, expressing his difficulty in asking Stefan to contribute to household expenses for both of us. Apparently, Stefan had worked hard, and it felt challenging to request financial contributions from him. Stefan and I had previously agreed to share expenses like apartment rent and other living costs. However, Stefan often tried to get me to pay for various items during our shopping trips, including unnecessary ingredients, alcohol, clothes, and accessories. When I resisted, he would act like a child denied a toy, calling me stingy. Despite these financial disagreements, I found comfort in the fact that, apart from these issues, Stefan didn't interfere much with my everyday life. This sense of comfort changed when we started living together, as Stefan's mother began to disrupt my routine. Unlike Stefan, she relentlessly interrupted my work at home, insisting I prioritize household chores. She would barge into my room, pulling on my clothes, making it impossible for me to focus on my work. Frustrated, I discussed the matter with Stefan, anticipating him to take his mother's side. Surprisingly, Stefan listened and promised to talk to his mother. I hoped for a compromise that would consider both our needs. Little did I know that Stefan's idea of a compromise would involve banishing me to the annex, a new, private room. I approached Stefan with a question about the hut, jokingly asking if I could even demolish it and build a new house. To my surprise, he casually replied, "You can even demolish it and build a new house if you want." Taking his words seriously, I promptly began remodeling the hut according to my taste. Engaged in cleaning, renovating, and changing wallpapers, I noticed that Stefan never once showed his face. Despite being married, it became apparent that Stefan had no intention of living in the remodeled hut with me. As I transformed the space, it dawned on me that within the family living trio, I was the only outsider. There were instances when I found myself alone at home, either when they went out to a barbecue restaurant or when I had to work overtime and missed out on shared meals. While these spirited plans were usually concocted by Stefan's mother, it seemed clear that she might have been the driving force behind my exclusion, perhaps hoping I would quickly leave her son. Despite this, Stefan had given me the freedom to do anything with the hut, and I took full advantage of it, engaging in DIY projects, installing new shelves, and personalizing the space. I made it my own. Interestingly, neither Stefan nor his parents ever visited the hut after I moved out. Although they must have been aware of my renovations, it seemed like I was no longer considered a part of their family, and they had no interest in my activities. Living away from the main house, especially without Stefan's mother around, I began to relish the independence, almost like living alone. I found solace in the fact that staying in the hut prevented her from interfering with my work. Installing new locks and enhancing security during the renovation, I ensured that no one, not even Stefan or his parents, could enter without my knowledge. It led me to reconsider if this new separation wasn't such a bad arrangement after all. However, it seemed my mother-in-law had anticipated my feelings. Unable to tolerate the treatment any longer, I found myself at a crossroads, contemplating my next move. As I settled into the renovated cabin, My mother-in-law's desperation to drive me out became palpable. Her petty harassment started with leaving trash in front of my cabin on garbage day instead of at the collection site. Sometimes, she would host barbecues in the garden without extending an invitation, intentionally wafting the smell of grilled meat towards my cabin. Despite her mild attempts, I couldn't help but smile at her futile efforts to push me away. Then, one day, she summoned me to the main house under the pretense of leftover meat and potatoes. Sensing there was more to it, I went along. Upon arrival, only she was present, and she placed a single piece of paper on the living room table, a divorce paper. It was clear that the real reason she called me was to present this document. If his mother instructed Stefan to submit it, he would do so without hesitation. All that remained was for me to agree, and Stefan and I could be divorced simply by submitting the paper to the city court. With a proud expression, his mother asserted, "Isn't it about time you gave up? There's no reason for you and Stefan to stay married anymore. Get out, you freeloading, unemployed woman." I was taken aback by her audacity, but her certainty in her plan only fueled my determination. Thrilled by the prospect of freedom, I eagerly asked to take the divorce paper, stating, "I'm going to the city court right now. Thank you so much." My mother-in-law, who had likely expected me to resist divorce, was left dumbfounded by my unexpected response. Having submitted the divorce paper at the city court, I wasted no time in packing my belongings. Feeling it was necessary to inform Stefan's mother about the divorce, I headed to the main house and informed her that the process had been successful. Regarding the cabin I renovated, I assured her that I would leave it as is, and she was free to demolish it or use it as she pleased. My positive attitude about leaving surprised even my mother-in-law, who, though seeming happy about my departure, wished me luck as I packed. On the day of my departure, Stefan and his father, seemingly realizing that I was truly leaving, expressed concern, asking, "Are you really going? What will we do without Rachel?" I smiled and thanked them for letting me use the cabin. I explained that since there was no point in being married anymore, and we were now divorced, it was time for me to move on. As I organized my belongings, I completed my move to a luxury apartment, a change I had been arranging for. Not long after settling into my new apartment, my mother-in-law called me awkwardly, saying, "Rachel, I need to ask you something." Cheerfully, I responded, "What's up? How's the cabin I'm using right now?" She then inquired about money, mentioning that Stefan had told her I was giving his father $33,000 a month. Confirming that it was true, I explained that despite her earlier accusation of being an unemployed freeloader, I was indeed working. She seemed surprised, thinking I had quit my job. I clarified that I hadn't quit but left the company to become the president of a new company, setting up a remote work system. Her reaction was one of disbelief, and I sighed, realizing that even Stefan was unaware of my promotion. Considering his attitude since we started living together, it seemed he never truly thought of himself as a husband. When asked about my earnings, including my side job, I nonchalantly mentioned it was roughly around $2 million. I may have exaggerated a bit with the $2 million figure. It's just a hassle to explain the exact figures. With that much money, could you lend us some? Actually, Father was laid off, and he kept it hidden. We've been managing somehow with the $3,000 you've been giving us. Neither Stefan nor I knew about it. It all made sense to me now. My father-in-law's words about it being pitiful to ask his son for money were just a pretense to get me to pay. He probably assumed I had money due to my superior position at our former company, and as a result, sweetly scammed me out of $3,000 a month under the guise of living expenses. In the end, I didn't mind too much since it allowed me to live peacefully in that quiet cabin. Well, I'm divorced from Stefan now, so I don't have any connection with your family, right? When I asserted this, my mother-in-law pleaded, "That's not true. To me and to Stefan, you're still family. Come back to us." I immediately declined, recognizing the potential for being used again. Stepping back into a relationship with Stefan would bring me no benefits. We were now complete strangers, and I found it uncomfortable for them to keep calling me family. Besides, they were the ones who drove me out in the first place. I'm really enjoying my life alone now. It's pretty much the same as when I was married, mostly living alone. The difference is, back then, I didn't spend money on myself, and $3,000 was taken from me every month. I prefer my current life much better. Goodbye then. I ended the call without hesitation, not understanding why they thought I would return. For my mother-in-law, it must have been a last-ditch effort. In fact, Stefan's salary wasn't that great, and he had a habit of saying, "I can't do it," and passing work to others. This trait, displayed in both our personal life and at the office, left him deemed unreliable, and he remained a regular employee without any salary increase. On top of that, with his father laid off and his mother being a housewife, they couldn't maintain their large house and ended up selling it. Now the three of them are living in the cabin I renovated. While it's just right for one person, it must be quite uncomfortable for three people in that cramped space. Since then, I haven't thought about them and continue to live peacefully.
My name is Julie, and I'm 30 years old. I work for a foreign investment company. My husband James has a job in services, but his contract is not stable because it gets renewed every year. This uncertainty makes us worried, especially towards the end of the year. James' family values government jobs a lot because his parents used to work for the government, and his sister still does. They don't really respect my job in a private company. Since we got married, we've been living with his family, who always make me feel bad about working for foreigners. In investment firms, the main goal is to make money and pay employees. Some people believe that those who work in private companies couldn't get government jobs. And if you work for a foreign company, it's because you couldn't find a job in a local company. James grew up thinking this way because of his family. So even though his job isn't permanent, he sticks to it because it gives him a certain status and salary. Once, I asked James, who was feeling anxious about his job, if it's safer to have a permanent job in a regular company than being a temporary worker in a government job, especially towards the end of the fiscal year. He quickly replied, "If I'm not a civil servant, it's better not to work at all." It seems like my husband hasn't told his parents that he's working as a temporary government employee, so he keeps asking me to keep it a secret. Also, because of his British nature, he boasts about getting promoted. It's a lie I don't understand, but he wants to keep up appearances to his parents and sister. He doesn't show me his salary statement, but only a small amount is deposited into the account. I asked, "This is James, he's a section manager now. His salary must have increased, right? How much is it now?" My husband quickly replied with just 4 words, "You can earn so much these days." I know I earn a good amount, but I'm not sure how it compares to what a section chief civil servant makes. I work as a bond trader, and most of my salary comes from commissions. Lately, I've been making consistent profits, so compared to other employees in regular companies, I earn quite a bit. When my husband mentioned the amount of money, my mother-in-law looked impressed, but she couldn't compare it to what people earned in her time. "But it seems James is doing well," she said proudly. His sister, who works at the city office, overheard our conversation. If he worked at the city office, he might be at the level of a division head. "Government jobs do pay well, don't they?" she commented. Seeing everyone's reactions, my husband looked even more uneasy. He seemed to regret bringing up my salary and swiftly changed the subject. "Let's not talk about salaries anymore. By the way, someone from the housing company visited recently. Are we considering renovations for this house?" He changed the topic. A sales rep from a housing company had indeed paid us a visit. Sensing my husband's train of thought, I decided to go along with the topic of home renovations. As for remodeling the kitchen, we were. But my mother-in-law cut me off abruptly, shouting, "Stay out of family matters. You're just a daughter-in-law. Keep quiet and do as you're told." She glared at me with a scared look. It seems like she's always unhappy with what I say and do. The main reason for her dissatisfaction seems to be that I'm not a government worker. She's particularly bothered by the fact that I manage my husband's salary and give him an allowance. My mother-in-law thinks my husband earns a lot, and she believes I control all of his money. But in reality, most of his salary goes towards his personal expenses, and our living costs are mostly covered by what I earn. As for my sister-in-law, she doesn't contribute anything to our expenses. You're taking money from an elderly couple who only have their pension. James earns a lot, so you're not struggling, right? She says, without any intention of helping out. Living in my husband's family home means we don't have to worry about paying rent, and we can manage with just my salary. But the atmosphere at home is undeniably tense. Unable to join the conversation about the housing company, I hurriedly cleaned up the kitchen after dinner. Neither my mother-in-law nor sister-in-law offered to help with the housework. After finishing my job, I rushed back home to cook, clean, and do laundry without a break. One good thing about working for a foreign company is that I don't have to work overtime as long as I do my job well. Being able to leave work on time is a relief. It helps me keep my work and personal life separate, and I don't have to bring work home, which is a big advantage. On his days off, my husband works on his computer at home. I worry if it's okay for him to bring work home and do it there. When I tried to ask him about it, he said, "I can't work overtime, and if I don't finish on time, I get in trouble." Don't worry about it, it's not your concern. Ironically, I was the one being scolded. Lately, my husband has been in a bad mood, and he gets angry as soon as I try to talk to him. He even yelled at me when I asked about the housing issue. It's none of your business. Didn't Mom tell you that already? Just follow the rules. That's all you need to do. Despite taking care of the household chores and finances in his home, I'm unhappy with my husband's attitude of keeping me in the dark. One day, someone from a home building company came to my in-laws' house with a computer. Everyone except me started discussing floor plans and looked at housing designs on the computer. When I tried to see what they were doing while having tea, she yelled at me, "You don't need to see this. Go away." I was surprised to learn that they were planning to build a new house instead of renovating the current one. My father-in-law had mentioned expanding the house because it was getting cramped. It seems that's what they're actually planning. My in-laws, who retired from their government jobs, have a lump sum of retirement money. I guess they intend to use that money to build a new house. And since I moved in, they've been living on their pension without paying any living expenses, so they should have plenty of money. I decided to distance myself from the situation. What worries me is whether my sister-in-law plans to live in the new house too. She's 28 years old and could get married, but there's been no talk of that, so I assume she'll be living in the new house. I dislike her as much as I do my mother-in-law because she never helps with any chores and is always complaining. I wish she would get married soon, but my father-in-law told the home builder, my daughter and her husband, my son, and us. Can we add another room? I want a house where all three households can live together. It was surprising to hear that my sister-in-law's husband might also live with us. But what's more surprising is that it's not about my son's family, but just my son. I was shocked that I wasn't included. The house they're planning to build is supposed to be quite big, but even so, the current site won't fit three households comfortably. Since my in-laws and sister-in-law are the ones building the house, I can't say anything, but I think keeping it clean will be a challenge. The man went out to see the model room and the construction site later. "You stay out of this, it's none of your business," my mother-in-law said spitefully. She probably expected me to argue back. She gave me a disapproving look when I didn't. It seems like the housing construction is moving forward. I'm not being told anything, but my in-laws and sister-in-law are getting ready for the move. Seeing my husband not doing anything, I asked, "Aren't you going to help with the move?" "Why should I? Aren't you the one handling it?" My husband got angry when he heard me speaking as if it were someone else's responsibility. I'm confused why he's getting mad when I don't even know when or where we're moving. Later on, whenever I had time, I started preparing for the move, but I packed our belongings separately. I was tired of my mother-in-law's attitude, and I was also feeling suspicious about my husband because of the new house. "When are we moving?" I asked my husband to confirm. "Just get ready, you don't need to know." "That's it," he replied. From conversations during meals, I gathered that the move was probably happening soon, but strangely, they're not telling me anything. Do they see me just as a housemate? I only found out about the move when the movers arrived. As I rushed, we started cleaning up the breakfast dishes. "Leave them, we'll buy new ones." "By the way, do you plan to move into the new house with us?" my mother-in-law asked. In that moment, I realized they were purposely excluding me from discussions of the new house's layout, and keeping me in the dark about the moving day was all part of their plan to kick me out of my in-laws' house. My husband, standing behind my mother-in-law and laughing, didn't say anything. He probably agrees with them. I had packed my things separately from my husband because I had a feeling this would happen. Now I'm being faced with hatred. From now on, only the family will live here. Do as you wish, my mother-in-law said, looking displeased. My sister-in-law, looking worried, probably thought I begged to come with them while crying. Not happy with my reaction, my mother-in-law snapped. Anyone who relies on someone else's earnings should leave now. James will build the new house and pay off the loan with his salary. We don't need a freeloader, she yelled angrily. I was actually the one planning to leave. When I heard about the mortgage repayment coming from my husband's salary, I had to hold back my laughter. It seemed my husband hadn't been informed by his mother about this plan. He looked surprised but realized he couldn't contradict his angry mother, so he just remained silent. It seemed his parents believed they wouldn't need to use their retirement money, and instead their son would pay off the loan and build a new house. I found it intriguing how they planned to handle the loan repayment, so I informed them with a smile, "Got it. I've decided to proceed with divorcing James." So I told them, "You all go ahead and move to the new house." My mother-in-law didn't like my reaction and started shouting, but my father-in-law and sister-in-law pulled her away, and they left the house. To my husband, who stayed behind, I said, "We'll bring the divorce papers later, so please give me your new address. I'm sure it's a splendid house. Since I haven't been informed at all, I'd like to see it." Reluctantly, my husband gave me the address. Since I didn't have many belongings, a friend helped me move them. Then, I changed all the public utility bills for my in-laws' house to my husband's name. I went back to my parents' house for the time being, and once I was settled, I went to the address my husband gave me to get his signature on the divorce papers. The new house where my husband and his family moved was indeed impressive. It was a grand 3-family home. As soon as my mother-in-law spotted me, she hurried over and yelled, "What are you doing here?" Ignoring her outburst, I asked my husband to sign the divorce papers. My mother-in-law then turned to him and said, "Useless wife. It's because she's not a government worker. Hurry up and say it." With a sarcastic tone, I turned to my mother-in-law and remarked, "What a splendid house. Are you sure you can afford it with James' salary?" My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger. "You're the outsider now, so don't concern yourself with us. Take the divorce papers and leave," she snapped. I wanted to savor the sight of my husband's pale face a little longer, but I grabbed the divorce papers and left immediately, keeping an eye on my furious mother-in-law. I went straight to the town hall to submit the papers and decided to start looking for a new place for myself. Feeling worn out from married life after that ordeal, I opted to live alone in a small apartment for a while. I found a property near my workplace that suited my needs, so I moved in right away and started afresh. Life became so much more comfortable without roommates boasting about being government workers or leaving all the chores to me. Just as I was starting to put my husband out of my mind, I suddenly received a call from an unfamiliar number. "I can't pay the loan, Julie. Will you come back to me? I'm calling from a friend's phone. I can't afford to pay the mortgage, electricity, water bills, or even my phone bill," my ex-husband said, his voice breaking with tears. I assumed he could ask his family for help, so I suggested, "Your sister has a stable job, and your parents are retired with pensions. They should have some savings, right?" When I dismissed his plea, my husband reluctantly confessed, "Actually, they don't have any savings left. My sister has debts and no extra money." Listening to my husband, it became clear that their retirement savings were nearly wiped out due to investment fraud, and his sister, who lived with their parents, had racked up significant debt by overspending on credit. This proud family of civil servants had nothing to hide. While I was living with them, they might have been able to keep it under wraps. But now that they've moved to a new house, they seem to be struggling to manage their lives and reach out to me out of desperation. However, I had no intention of reuniting with them. I declined their plea and ended the call. After that, the phone rang numerous times, but I continued to ignore it until the calls eventually ceased. Later, when I visited their new house, I noticed a for sale sign. There happened to be someone from the housing company there, so I couldn't resist asking about the in-law family. It turns out they sold the house immediately after it was built, but they still had a remaining loan. The housing company representative also mentioned, "I was surprised by that family. Despite their boasting, they said they would sell right away if they couldn't repay the loan because our relative was a cosigner. It seems to have caused some trouble. It seems that because a relative cosigned their loan, that relative had to take on the debt. Once this became known, considering their past boasting about being civil servants, it appears they're now facing ostracism from their relatives. It's not surprising, really. They caused trouble for a relative who works in a private company by involving them as a cosigner." As I relaxed on my sofa at home, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of imagining what my ex-husband and his family, who no longer had anyone to boast to about being civil servants and were now seen as a nuisance by their relatives, might be going through.
Hey everyone, I'm Claire, and I want to share a chapter of my life that revolves around challenging relationships with my in-laws and husband. Currently navigating the complexities of a divorce, I thought it might resonate with those of you who've experienced unwarranted criticism from your in-laws. Let me take you back to how it all began. I met Zane, my now estranged husband, on a dating site when I was a 19-year-old college student. Zane, at 25, had a stable job. Despite the age gap, love blossomed between us. I've never been one to judge based on age or appearance, so Zane's age was never a concern for me. However, Zane struggled with our age difference. He often questioned, "Why are you with me, Claire? I don't understand. I'm so much older than you. You could find someone your own age who's better suited for you." Yes, I could, but I don't want to. I fell in love with you, and age doesn't matter to me. Zane, burdened by insecurities, persisted. "There must be other reasons, Claire. It's not natural for someone like you to love someone like me. I wish you'd tell me the truth." "I am telling you the truth. I don't want to date boys my age. I love you, and that's all that matters to me." Despite my assurances, Zane struggled to believe me, revealing deep-seated self-esteem issues that may have contributed to his single status. Determined to prove the authenticity of my feelings, I embarked on a journey to demonstrate the depth of my love for him. Throughout our entire relationship, I refrained from letting Zane spend money on me. While I wasn't a broke college student, I wasn't rolling in wealth either. Despite my financial constraints, I made sure to buy him gifts and cover my own expenses each time. I held a modest job, so I wasn't destitute. Zane seemed to appreciate these gestures. Regrettably, Zane's low self-esteem persisted, and he continued to doubt the authenticity of my love. Despite my best efforts to be supportive and understanding, his mistrust shattered my heart. It wasn't until the first 2 years had passed that I discovered the root of Zane's self-esteem issues. Meeting his parents, Michael and Molly, shed light on his struggles. Michael, Zane's father, had experienced a stroke of luck, winning the lottery and dramatically improving their lives. They purchased an extravagant house and secured their future with the remaining funds. However, Michael and Molly carried an air of superiority. During our initial encounter, Michael boasted, "Not everyone can make it big like me. I was a hard-working man, and look where it got me. Do you know how uncommon it is to win a huge lottery? The chances are very low, but I did it on the first try." They took pride in their decision-making skills, insinuating that Zane, despite completing college, would never match their financial success. Molly hinted that Zane's previous partners were gold diggers, leaving as soon as their financial situation improved. The couple openly questioned Zane's ability to make sound choices. This attitude infuriated me. Zane's parents indirectly accused every girl he dated of being interested only in his money. Over time, Zane internalized these beliefs, contributing to his insecurities. The insinuation that I, too, was a gold digger became a humiliating part of the narrative. Fed up with the unjust assumptions, I decided to defend both Zane and myself. I declared, "I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with you. Zane has worked hard to establish himself in his career, and with time, he will achieve even greater success. Michael rebutted, "Well, that doesn't change the fact that women only want him for money. The money we have is ours, but Zayn does co-own the house. Ultimately, it will be his when we pass. Let me tell you, every time they see our $200,000 house, I swear these girls see dollar signs in their eyes." I can't vouch for Zayn's past relationships, but I'm certainly not in this for the money. I love your son, and that's the reason we're together. I have no interest in your house. Don't worry, Claire. Sometimes it's challenging to accept that people can be successful and live in nice houses. You live in a small rented apartment with roommates. After spending time around our house, you might start desiring it too. It's just a matter of time. Michael and Molly's comments were pushing my anger to the brink. I was on the verge of exploding. Zayn heard it all but chose not to respond or defend himself, steering the conversation in a different direction. His nonchalant attitude surprised me. On our way home, I decided to address it with him. "Zayn, your parents are being unkind. They're insulting both of us. Why didn't you speak up?" "What did you expect me to say, Claire? I can't be certain they're entirely wrong. Women in the past have used me to try and benefit from my parents' wealth. They made grand plans involving the house and how it would be ours once my parents passed away. Even if they were gold diggers, that doesn't mean I am one too. You stayed silent when your family insulted me as well. You know my family is well off now. There's a chance they're right about everything. I'm not saying you had bad intentions, but I can understand why it might seem questionable. You don't have parents, so you rely on my inheritance alone. What you're suggesting is absurd, Zayn. I've never pressured you to spend money on me. And just because I don't have an inheritance doesn't give you the right to label me a gold digger." Zayn remained unwilling to acknowledge my concerns, insisting that he loved me, and the reasons behind it didn't matter. He shrugged off the need for further discussion. While some might have found solace in such assurances, I couldn't accept the thought of him harboring negative beliefs about me. I attempted numerous conversations, hoping to make him understand my perspective. I even suggested therapy, recognizing its potential benefits for him. However, he adamantly claimed there was nothing wrong, causing me to eventually abandon the effort. As time passed, I distanced myself from his family. We became engaged shortly after my college graduation, and although my job paid decently, I started saving to contribute to our wedding expenses. We split the costs evenly and got married when I was 22. However, the subsequent 3 years turned into a tumultuous period of my life. Zayn frequently visited his parents, returning home in a sour mood each time. I knew Michael and Molly were still taunting him and branding me as a gold digger. Despite my pleas for Zayn to limit contact with them, he continued to engage with his parents. Their words poisoned his perception of our relationship, convincing him that no one could genuinely love him. Even after years of love and care, Zayn remained suspicious of me. The burden of constantly proving myself became increasingly draining. However, the breaking point arrived on Zayn's birthday. In line with his preference for small celebrations, we had a quiet cake party at home. I presented him with the expensive watch he had desired. Zayn was elated with the gift, but my joy waned when he suggested visiting his parents to showcase it. Despite my reluctance, I accompanied him at his insistence. Upon reaching their house, Zayn eagerly displayed the watch to Molly and Michael. "Mom, Dad, look at this beautiful watch Claire gave me. I've been wanting it for a while now. Isn't it gorgeous?" "Oh, did she know, Zayn? It seems she does love you after all. We were quite concerned for a while there." "Don't get carried away, Michael. She's a gold digger. She married our son because we own a $200,000 house. Let's not forget the facts." "Yeah, you're right. I almost forgot that the house is the only reason Claire married Zayn." "Excuse me? Why do you think I married your son for your house?" "Well, you were just living in an apartment after working for 4 years. Besides, Zayn is so much older than you. Why would you marry him unless you want something from him? I'm sure our house was always an attraction, if not his money. I married your son because I love him. All your theories about my gold-digging intentions are wrong. Zayn knows the truth, and he will tell you that, won't you, Zayn?" To my complete surprise, Zayn remained silent. I was already feeling uncomfortable with my in-laws' belief that I was a gold digger, but Zayn's reaction, or lack thereof, shocked me. He kept his head down and avoided eye contact with me. Feeling perplexed, I decided to push him a bit. I couldn't fathom why he wasn't standing up for me. "Why are you not saying anything? Your parents always thought I was a gold digger. How will they know the real me if you don't tell them? Why are you quiet? Tell them they're wrong." I don't know what you want me to say, Claire. I don't know if my parents are off the mark. There might be a possibility that you're after this house." "Are you serious right now, Zayn? You believe I married you for your assets?" He's not wrong to think like that. It's suspicious that you've never considered buying a house. You haven't even discussed it with him. For someone renting a place, owning a house should have been a priority. Yeah, it should be a priority, but you've chosen not to work toward owning a house. Our place is expensive, and you can't afford something like this even if you tried. So you decided to marry Zayn and settle here. That makes more sense to me. I mean, why would you marry me, Claire? You might have feelings for me, but I think there's more to it than just love. I found myself speechless after this exchange. All the love I had for Zayn seemed to have been reduced to nothing. At the end of the day, my in-laws and even my husband viewed me as a gold digger. While my in-laws' reaction bothered me, it was Zayn's response that devastated me. In that moment, I made a decision. I wanted a divorce. I didn't immediately disclose my decision to them. I waited for the right time. So when Zayn and I returned to our place, I contacted a lawyer and initiated the divorce process. The lawyer assured me that the papers would be ready within a week. In the meantime, I opted to stay in a separate room. Zayn assumed I was just letting off steam and had no idea of what was coming. When the divorce papers finally arrived at my parents' house, I packed my bags and left. When Zayn called me in a panic, I instructed him to come to an address and bring my in-laws along. Despite his confusion, he agreed. Upon their arrival, I was waiting on the porch. They looked taken aback by the house. I said, "You must be wondering why I brought you here. It's a beautiful house, isn't it? No one can compare their house to this. It costs around $2 million in today's market. Pretty expensive, but worth the money. There's also furniture with an added value of millions. What is this place, Claire? I don't know why you have access to such a house. Why don't you guys come in so that we can talk? I can't tell you everything on my porch." "What do you mean by your porch?" I brushed off their astonishment and walked inside. They trailed behind, even more impressed by the opulence within. The owners of the house had spared no expense. As we settled down, I took a deep breath and addressed them. "I've reached a decision, and that's why you're here. I filed for divorce. Here are the papers. We can proceed with an uncontested divorce if you agree." "What? I don't understand. Why are you filing for divorce?" Zayn's voice held a mixture of confusion and concern. "Because you and your parents believe I'm a gold digger. You think I'm after your house, right? Despite my assurances, you refuse to listen. So I'll spare you from my gold-digging self and divorce Zayn. It seems that's what everyone wants. You're considering divorce just because my parents told the truth. That's ridiculous. We didn't say anything untrue. Why the dramatics?" Zayn's tone betrayed his disbelief. "I think this is for the best, Zayn. If she's adamant, you should sign the papers. At least then you'll find someone who truly loves you." His mother interjected, her expression unreadable. "Why did you bring us to this house? Do you expect me to buy this for you as part of our divorce settlement?" Zayn's voice carried a tinge of accusation. "Why would I need you to buy this house, Zayn? This house is already mine," I replied calmly. The shock and disbelief etched on their faces hit me like a bomb. They regarded me with disbelief, as if I were joking. Zayn and his family seemed utterly unconvinced. "How on earth can you afford a house like this? You're renting, and your job isn't enough to cover this. Stop lying to us," Zayn's father demanded. his tone sharp with suspicion. I'm not lying, Zane. Remember when I mentioned that my parents left me some inheritance? Well, this is the house I was talking about. It's under a trust now, but I'll officially inherit it when I turn 30. I don't work a high-paying job because I have a trust fund waiting for me. That's impossible. Your parents passed away a long time ago. They should have let you have the house earlier. Well, you see, my parents were aware of the potential leeches I might attract. So they instructed me never to disclose the house or trust fund to anyone. Call it foresight. But they knew someone could exploit me. Hence, they placed everything in a trust to keep it safe until I reached 30. By then, I'd hopefully be settled with someone who genuinely cared about me, not my inheritance. Oh my God, Claire. You should have told us about your wealth. We had no idea. This is a sizable house you have. We could all live very comfortably here. Yeah, you should have shared that sooner. We thought you were after our house. We could have avoided all the misunderstandings. I'd always knew Claire was perfect for Zane. I've been saying she's a great woman. Look how wealthy she is. Zane really found a great match. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Their attitude toward me had shifted so rapidly that it made my head spin. What was even more bizarre was that they soon seemed to forget about the divorce filing. I took out the divorce papers and signed them. As I was saying, here's my signature for an uncontested divorce. You can just sign these to make it easy if you want to fight. We can take this to court. I won't live with you anymore. Claire, listen to me. There's no need to rush this. You've already proven you're not a gold digger. There's no reason to get a divorce anymore. We'll even apologize for any misunderstanding. That should make things better, right? Yes, Michael is right. We are sorry, Claire. We doubted you for no reason. I don't want your insincere apologies, Zane. For 2 years, you allowed your family to berate me and label me a gold digger. I expected you to at least defend me. But no, you sided with them and accused me of being a gold digger as well. I won't stay with someone who doesn't respect his wife. I'm done with you. We can part ways amicably or involve the courts. The choice is yours. Zane, Molly, and Michael tried their best to change my decision, pleading with me to let go of the past. In their minds, what happened was just a simple misunderstanding. Not once did they show remorse for tarnishing my name. Their audacity fueled my anger. When I reached my breaking point, I demanded they leave before I called the police. My anger intimidated them, and they left. Over the next few weeks, Zane and my in-laws continued to harass me daily. They begged, pleaded, and even offered bribes to convince me to stay. Their belief that I could be swayed with money only intensified my fury. It revealed that they still considered me motivated by financial gain. The irony was that, as Zane co-owned the house with his parents, I was entitled to half of his share. This realization fueled their desperation for reconciliation. Despite their attempts, I remained steadfast in my decision to part ways. I relocated all my belongings to my parents' house, asserting my right to stay there even before officially taking ownership. Zane and the in-laws persisted in reaching out, prompting me to change my number entirely. I wanted to avoid their constant attempts to contact me from unfamiliar numbers. Zane attempted to discuss matters at my workplace, but security was informed and asked him to leave. Zane still hadn't signed the divorce papers, holding out hope for a change in my decision. Nearly a year has passed since I initiated the divorce proceedings. With only a year or less remaining before the legal process concludes, I've managed quite well on my own. Living independently, I've found happiness and financial stability. While I've gone on dates, I'm not considering anything serious at the moment. According to a cousin of Zane's, they are apprehensive about paying me my entitled share of the house. Legal fees are piling up, and their savings are insufficient. Zane is even pushing for a sale, harboring resentment toward his parents for the upheaval in his life. At this point, I simply don't care and only want to be free from that toxic family. Hello, I'm Ingrid, and I'm 27 years old. I was orphaned at a very young age because both my parents passed away in a car crash. They didn't have any family to look after me, so I was put into an orphanage. I was there for about 3 years before my parents adopted me. My adoptive parents turned out to be these billionaires, so I had a pretty rich and fulfilling life after that. They didn't want to make my adoption a big deal, so they kept it hushed up. They wanted to do good without it having been broadcast everywhere. When I turned into an adult and had my own place, the two of them decided that they wanted to expand their business further and took to touring Europe in search of opportunities. It was around this time that I met Patrick, my now ex-husband. We met in college and instantly liked each other. After a couple of conversations, Patrick, a very happy-go-lucky, caring man, made me like him a whole lot more. Our dates led to us becoming an official couple. We had the perfect relationship, although there was one problem. It was no secret that Patrick's family did not like me. The first time I met them, Patrick and I had just graduated college. He waited to introduce me to his parents until we were both well settled in our lives. By that, I mean that we were both working good jobs. Patrick had warned me that his parents tended to be a little judgmental when it came to their children's significant others, and he wanted me to make the best impression I could. I didn't mind, but meeting the parents was nerve-wracking for me. By the time Patrick introduced me to his parents, we had been dating for a good 4 years. In those 4 years, we also got engaged, so I guess that, in itself, it was going to be a problem for his parents, considering they never even got to know me as his girlfriend. I remember freaking out about it with Patrick the day before we were supposed to meet his parents. They're going to hate me, Patrick. They won't, I promise you. Do you not think that they'll be shocked to find out that we're engaged? Well, yeah, but I don't think it will be that big of a deal. Are you being serious right now? You were scared about introducing me to them because you know how judgy they are, and you think introducing me as your fiancé is not going to make them judge me even more. Look, even if they do, will what they say really matter? It won't to me, but I don't know about you. You always seem so careful about them. I promise you that it won't affect or matter to me at all, Ingrid. All right, if you say so. But do you think maybe we should just not tell them we're engaged, and then, like a month or so later, we should tell them? Will that make you feel any better about this whole thing? Because I have no problem with either of the options. I think we should hide it just in case. I'll do anything to get on that good side. You have nothing to worry about. I'll be there with you no matter what. Thanks, sweetie. The only reason I had been freaking out so much was that whenever I suggested that Patrick tell his parents about me, he would make a whole fuss about them not going to approve of me. Now, at this point, I began to kind of understand why. You see, Patrick's family were pretty rich, and they loved to live lavishly. They wanted that for their children as well, and the only way they accepted their children dating was if they also mingled with people who were as rich or even richer than them. The way I was living back then was by no means rich according to their standards. I hadn't told Patrick about my family because I didn't see the point of it. Plus, by the time I figured out why he was so adamant about not letting me introduce myself to his parents, I felt like it was even more unnecessary for them to know just who my father was. I wanted them to like me for me and not for my money. I naively believed that they would like me that way, but oh boy was I wrong. We decided to meet Patrick's parents at a fine dining restaurant. At that time, Patrick held my hand as we walked in. I wore my engagement ring on my necklace because I wanted to keep it on me without actually drawing any attention to it. When we got to our table, his parents already looked upset. Patrick told me to expect that because they were big sticklers about time. When we had arrived exactly 2 minutes late, well, we were already off to a bad start. His parents gave me a once-over and twisted their faces into disgust. They proceeded to ignore me for a little while as they made conversation with Patrick. I will admit I felt really small in their eyes. The longer they ignored my presence, the stronger my urge grew to leave. I kept my head down for the most part until finally, Patrick drew his parents' attention towards me. Mom, Dad, you can't just keep talking to me here. This is my wonderful girlfriend, Ingrid. Oh, hello. It's a pleasure to meet both of you. Hi, I wish I could say the same. Mom, what? I'm only speaking the truth. So, Ingrid, I heard you and Patrick met in college. Is that right? Yes, we did. We happened to share some classes together. Ah, and how did you manage to attend this college? From what I know, the tuition is pretty high, and it's a pretty hard place to get into. Dad, that is enough, Patrick. You will not speak to your father that way. He's asking a very valid question, Ingrid. Please answer him. Well, I got a full ride there. I'm super grateful I got to go there because not only did I get to learn a lot of things, but I also got to meet Patrick, which has been one of the best things that has happened to me. Of course, it's one of the best things that's happened to you. He's loaded, and you need that kind of money. At least you have some brains because your looks aren't all that good. You know what? That's enough. We're leaving. Come on, Ingrid. Patrick grabbed my hand, and we walked out. I was in shock at the way that his parents had treated me. I couldn't believe that people could be so mean so openly and to the person's face. I was in too much shock to even feel anything. The car ride back home was silent because Patrick was fuming. When we reached home, Patrick made it a point to make sure that I was doing okay. But truthfully, at the moment, I really did not know how to feel. I had dressed up nicely and made sure that I sat properly as well. I didn't order anything expensive, but somehow, without me even saying a word, Paula and Marley made their judgment about me. Patrick didn't speak to his parents for a while after that. They texted him and told him that we had been very disrespectful by walking out on them during lunch. Patrick didn't respond to that and only texted them about a month later to tell them that he had gotten engaged. His parents weren't too happy about it, but Patrick threatened them with no contact if they said or did anything against me. They offered to pay for our wedding on the condition that they got to make all the decisions regarding it. Obviously, neither Patrick nor I wanted that, so we decided to do the next best thing, elope. My parents were in Europe, and they knew about me eloping. They were just happy that I was happy. And they did send Patrick and me a gift. Patrick did raise his brows at how they sent us a pretty expensive painting as a gift. But I just brushed it off as them having enough money to spend it on that. After getting married, we next met Paula and Marley at a party that they had hosted. They invited us to celebrate their anniversary. Truth be told, I was actually pretty happy that they had invited me despite the dislike they held for me. When we got there, I was ignored by everyone. If you think being ignored by 2 people was embarrassing, being ignored by about 30 people was even worse. I hung by Patrick's side for the most part, but nobody even tried to talk to me. If I ever did try to speak and make conversation, people would just either look me up and down and walk away, or they would continue talking to Patrick as if I never said anything. By the end of the night, I was in tears. I was humiliated and downright disgusted by the behavior that everyone was showing. The crowd had asked Paula and Marley to make a speech at the end of the night, and they got up to make one. By this time, I was tired and I wanted to go home, but in their speech, they began by talking about how grateful they were to have almost everyone in the room in their lives. That was only the first jab that they threw at me. They kept making many more, which the guests kept laughing at. At some point, I just got up and walked out. I ordered an Uber and went back home. I cried the entire way back home and up until Patrick got back home. When he got back, he seemed upset and angry. Why did you walk out like that? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? What? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me right now, Ingrid. I had to endure my parents yelling at me and a lot of the guests pitying me for being with you. Are you serious? What about how embarrassing it was for me? Oh, come on, Ingrid. You could deal with it for one night. It was my parents' anniversary, for God's sake. I was ignored by everyone, and your parents chose to make even more fun of me in their toast. How do you possibly expect me to be okay with something like that? I'm not saying what they did was right, but you could have just lived through it. I would have spoken to them about it after. What would that have done for me? I don't like being put in positions where I'm only being humiliated Everyone was laughing at me. You've never been in that position before, so it's easy for you to talk about this like it's no big deal. My parents expect an apology from you. I want one too. I'm afraid that I won't be doing that. I'll only do that if they give me one too. As for your apology, I see no reason for apologizing to you. You always stood up for me. I don't see why this is any different. This is very different because, unlike before, you humiliated my family in front of all our guests, and your parents humiliated me, your wife, in front of all their guests. Maybe my parents were right about you. You're impossible. With that, Patrick went to sleep in the guest bedroom. I couldn't understand why he had a sudden change of behavior. Was it really that bad for him after I walked out? He was always the first person to stand up for me, especially considering the fact that I was usually bored with whatever his parents had to say about me. For me to walk out should have been the biggest signifier of just how bad they made me feel. Yet Patrick didn't seem to care about that. Patrick didn't talk to me for the next week. I also got a lot of texts from his parents, calling me ungrateful and an embarrassment. I tried to talk to Patrick, but he refused to. Eventually, I decided to give in and apologize to both him and his parents. Even that felt humiliating, but I was willing to go through it because I loved Patrick, and I didn't want this to be the hill I died on. Things after that only got worse for me. Patrick's parents retired and spent a lot of their time hosting family dinners. They hosted it once a week, and Patrick was always invited. The first time they hosted it, Patrick brought me along with him to their house. As soon as I stepped in, the atmosphere in the room got awkward. Paula was busy getting ready, so she didn't see me immediately, but Marley and the rest of Patrick's siblings awkwardly glanced at me. They didn't talk to me, and Patrick left me to stand by myself while he caught up with the rest of his family. When Paula came downstairs, she saw me and practically flew over to me in rage. "What are you doing here?" "Excuse me?" "No, I will not excuse you. What are you doing in my house right now?" "Well, you invited us for dinner." "Wrong. I invited Patrick because it's a family dinner. I'm Patrick's wife, so I'm a part of this family, am I not?" "Absolutely not. An orphan like you deserves no space in this family." "What? You thought you could hide the detail from us. We do background checks on our children's spouses, and you are not in my son's league whatsoever. I will never accept you here." "Why not?" "That can't be the only thing that determines whether I get to be a part of your family. You're ugly and poor. You'd never fit into our elite circles. I never want to see you again." "Why are you being so superficial? Are you scared that I'll damage your reputation just by existing? Does the fact that I bring your son happiness not satisfy you? If happiness brought in money, a lot of people would be billionaires. This is exactly why you'd never fit in with us. Or maybe I'll just never be as superficial as the rest of you because I value who a person actually is. You never even took the chance to get to know me before casting your judgments on me." "I'm glad I don't fit in with you, Ingrid. That's enough. Here's some money. Get yourself an Uber and leave." I stared at Patrick in shock as he held out the money. He shoved the money in my hands and turned back around towards his mother. She smirked at me. I felt tears spring into my eyes as I turned back around and walked out. I was once again crying in the Uber. I didn't understand why Patrick had changed so drastically. Was this his way of making up to his parents after the party? Whatever it was, I was hurt and angry at him. He was okay with his parents using my past as an insult and defending them instead of me, like he usually did. I wanted to yell and scream, but I knew that would only project a worse image of me and prove them right, which is why I walked away. I tried to think if anything I said was out of line, but I really did not see anything wrong. I was merely standing up for myself, calmly might I add. After Patrick came back home, he went back to not talking to me. My heart was breaking, and I felt so alone. I knew that he expected another apology, but I couldn't bring myself to do it like the last time. Paula had blatantly insulted me in the worst way, and Patrick was angry at me for it. If anything, I expected an apology from him. For the next 2 weeks, Patrick and I didn't speak to each other. It was hard at first, but I got used to it. Eventually, the dinners his family hosted still happened, and about once a week, I was all alone at home, which I truthfully did not mind. On one of those nights, my parents video called me. Hey, honey. Hey, sweetie. How's it going? Hey, Dad. Hey, Mom. Things are not good. Why? What's wrong, sweetie? If you need help with anything, feel free to ask us. I don't think this is something you guys would be able to help me out with, but thanks for the offer. Where's Patrick? Is he not helping? That's the thing. He's part of the problem. Huh? Sweetie, could you be a little more clear about what the problem is? Well, his parents are pretty wealthy and also very snobby. Oh, I hate those kinds of people. Tell me about it. Anyways, they thought that I was some poor girl who could never live up to their standards and fit into their elite circles. So they took it upon themselves to humiliate me every time that I met them. What the hell? Oh yeah, and the last time I went over, Patrick's mom decided calling me an orphan was a good insult. Oh, that woman. I'm going to claw her face off. How dare she call my precious child an orphan? Do they not know about us? And what the hell has Patrick been doing in all this? I didn't tell them about you guys because I knew that their opinion of me would change if they knew. And I wanted them to like me for who I was and not for my wealth. As for Patrick, he's siding with them. He thinks that I was disrespectful when I stood up for myself. Honey, are you sure this is the man you want to be with? I love him a lot, but this is not how I want it to be. We haven't been speaking to each other for the last 2 weeks, and I'm surprisingly okay with that. All right, sweetie. I'll get you in touch with one of my friends over there. As for your worry about us not being able to help you out, I think we might actually be able to help you get a little sweet revenge. Huh? What do you mean? Your dad and I are coming there next week. We wanted to take you and Patrick on a vacation, but now we can just take you. More things for us to do together, I guess. Really? Oh my God, I'm so excited to finally get to see the two of you in person. Again, that was a real pick-me-up. Finally, I felt happy after so long. The three of us continued to talk for a little while after that. Dad elaborated on his plan to help me. After a little while, he asked me where these dinners of theirs were being held. And as far as I knew, they took turns hosting in their house and at restaurants. Conveniently, the week that my parents were coming, the dinner was going to happen in a restaurant. I needed to get information on where exactly this dinner was going to be held, so I could provide my parents with the location. Thankfully, I had Patrick's email logged into my phone. And if there was one thing I knew about Paula and Marley, it was that they loved to email everyone everything. It wasn't that hard to get the location, and I gave it to my parents. At the same time, my mom's lawyer friend contacted me, and we got started on the process of filing for divorce. My parents landed in the States and decided to check into their hotel, where I met them. We had lunch together, and then the two of them sent me on my way for a spa day that they entirely paid for because they thought I deserved it while they got ready to get revenge on my in-laws. My parents walked into the restaurant that Patrick and his family were at. According to Dad, when they approached the table, Marley and Paula began to murmur among themselves as they recognized just who he was. Mom told me that this was how the conversation went. Hello? Oh my gosh, Mr. Burns. What brings you here? Oh wow, I just happened to see some familiar faces, and I figured that I could drop in and probably dine with you. Familiar faces? Who are you speaking about, Mr. Burns? Well, I see Patrick. Me? Well, hello. A pleasure to meet you. You, my daughter, has spoken a lot about you. But speaking of my daughter, where is she? Your daughter? I'm afraid you're mistaken. I don't think she's here, but she should be, right? I'm sorry, Mr. Burns, but we didn't even know that you had a daughter. Of course I do. And she's married to Patrick. What? I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken. Yes, his wife's name is Ingrid, and she was an orphan. Yes, I do know that, and that is why we adopted her. Excuse me? You're her dad? Yes, and from what I see, she isn't here. She's been telling me that there has been some problems with her in-laws, but I see what the problem was. It was you. No, she was the one who hid this huge thing from us. If we knew, you would have treated her better. She didn't want you to treat her nicely because of her background. Oh well, she did ask me to hand this over to Patrick. My dad handed Patrick the divorce papers and walked out. After that, it only took a couple of phone calls for a lot of investors to pull away from Marley's business. They were quickly crashing, and nothing was more satisfying than watching them crumble down to the levels that they made fun of. I got a lot of texts from all Patrick's family, calling me a bunch of nasty names while some of them begged me to talk to my dad and reverse what he had done. Patrick thankfully signed the divorce papers without any hassle. My parents and I went on a long vacation after that. I had the time of my life, and I slowly began to heal. Yeah, it hurt that I had lost the love of my life, but I also learned just how important it is to stand up for myself. I'm forever grateful to my parents for everything they've done for me, and I can't wait to see what else life has to offer me. Hello, I'm Ingrid, and I'm 27 years old. I was orphaned at a very young age because both my parents passed away in a car crash. They didn't have any family to look after me, so I was put into an orphanage. I was there for about 3 years before my parents adopted me. My adoptive parents turned out to be these billionaires, so I had a pretty rich and fulfilling life after that. They didn't want to make my adoption a big deal, so they kept it hushed up. They wanted to do good without it having been broadcast everywhere. When I turned into an adult and had my own place, the two of them decided that they wanted to expand their business further and took to touring Europe in search of opportunities. It was around this time that I met Patrick, my now ex-husband. We met in college and instantly liked each other. After a couple of conversations, Patrick, a very happy-go-lucky, caring man, made me like him a whole lot more. Our dates led to us becoming an official couple. We had the perfect relationship, although there was one problem. It was no secret that Patrick's family did not like me. The first time I met them, Patrick and I had just graduated college. He waited to introduce me to his parents until we were both well settled in our lives. By that, I mean that we were both working good jobs. Patrick had warned me that his parents tended to be a little judgmental when it came to their children's significant others, and he wanted me to make the best impression I could. I didn't mind, but meeting the parents was nerve-wracking for me. By the time Patrick introduced me to his parents, we had been dating for a good 4 years. In those 4 years, we also got engaged, so I guess that, in itself, it was going to be a problem for his parents, considering they never even got to know me as his girlfriend. I remember freaking out about it with Patrick the day before we were supposed to meet his parents. They're going to hate me, Patrick. They won't, I promise you. Do you not think that they'll be shocked to find out that we're engaged? Well, yeah, but I don't think it will be that big of a deal. Are you being serious right now? You were scared about introducing me to them because you know how judgy they are, and you think introducing me as your fiancé is not going to make them judge me even more. Look, even if they do, will what they say really matter? It won't to me, but I don't know about you. You always seem so careful about them. I promise you that it won't affect or matter to me at all, Ingrid. All right, if you say so. But do you think maybe we should just not tell them we're engaged, and then, like a month or so later, we should tell them? Will that make you feel any better about this whole thing? Because I have no problem with either of the options. I think we should hide it just in case. I'll do anything to get on that good side. You have nothing to worry about. I'll be there with you no matter what. Thanks, sweetie. The only reason I had been freaking out so much was that whenever I suggested that Patrick tell his parents about me, he would make a whole fuss about them not going to approve of me. Now, at this point, I began to kind of understand why. You see, Patrick's family were pretty rich, and they loved to live lavishly. They wanted that for their children as well, and the only way they accepted their children dating was if they also mingled with people who were as rich or even richer than them. The way I was living back then was by no means rich according to their standards. I hadn't told Patrick about my family because I didn't see the point of it. Plus, by the time I figured out why he was so adamant about not letting me introduce myself to his parents, I felt like it was even more unnecessary for them to know just who my father was. I wanted them to like me for me and not for my money. I naively believed that they would like me that way, but oh boy was I wrong. We decided to meet Patrick's parents at a fine dining restaurant. At that time, Patrick held my hand as we walked in. I wore my engagement ring on my necklace because I wanted to keep it on me without actually drawing any attention to it. When we got to our table, his parents already looked upset. Patrick told me to expect that because they were big sticklers about time. When we had arrived exactly 2 minutes late, well, we were already off to a bad start. His parents gave me a once-over and twisted their faces into disgust. They proceeded to ignore me for a little while as they made conversation with Patrick. I will admit I felt really small in their eyes. The longer they ignored my presence, the stronger my urge grew to leave. I kept my head down for the most part until finally, Patrick drew his parents' attention towards me. "Mom, Dad, you can't just keep talking to me here. This is my wonderful girlfriend, Ingrid." "Oh, hello. It's a pleasure to meet both of you." "Hi, I wish I could say the same." "Mom, what? I'm only speaking the truth. So, Ingrid, I heard you and Patrick met in college. Is that right?" "Yes, we did. We happened to share some classes together." "Ah, and how did you manage to attend this college?" "From what I know, the tuition is pretty high, and it's a pretty hard place to get into." "Dad, that is enough, Patrick. You will not speak to your father that way. He's asking a very valid question, Ingrid. Please answer him." "Well, I got a full ride there. I'm super grateful I got to go there because not only did I get to learn a lot of things, but I also got to meet Patrick, which has been one of the best things that has happened to me. Of course, it's one of the best things that's happened to you. He's loaded, and you need that kind of money. At least you have some brains because your looks aren't all that good. You know what? That's enough. We're leaving. Come on, Ingrid." Patrick grabbed my hand, and we walked out. I was in shock at the way that his parents had treated me. I couldn't believe that people could be so mean so openly and to the person's face. I was in too much shock to even feel anything. The car ride back home was silent because Patrick was fuming. When we reached home, Patrick made it a point to make sure that I was doing okay. But truthfully, at the moment, I really did not know how to feel. I had dressed up nicely and made sure that I sat properly as well. I didn't order anything expensive, but somehow, without me even saying a word, Paula and Marley made their judgment about me. Patrick didn't speak to his parents for a while after that. They texted him and told him that we had been very disrespectful by walking out on them during lunch. Patrick didn't respond to that and only texted them about a month later to tell them that he had gotten engaged. His parents weren't too happy about it, but Patrick threatened them with no contact if they said or did anything against me. They offered to pay for our wedding on the condition that they got to make all the decisions regarding it. Obviously, neither Patrick nor I wanted that, so we decided to do the next best thing, elope. My parents were in Europe, and they knew about me eloping. They were just happy that I was happy. And they did send Patrick and me a gift. Patrick did raise his brows at how they sent us a pretty expensive painting as a gift. But I just brushed it off as them having enough money to spend it on that. After getting married, we next met Paula and Marley at a party that they had hosted. They invited us to celebrate their anniversary. Truth be told, I was actually pretty happy that they had invited me despite the dislike they held for me. When we got there, I was ignored by everyone. If you think being ignored by 2 people was embarrassing, being ignored by about 30 people was even worse. I hung by Patrick's side for the most part, but nobody even tried to talk to me. If I ever did try to speak and make conversation, people would just either look me up and down and walk away, or they would continue talking to Patrick as if I never said anything. By the end of the night, I was in tears. I was humiliated and downright disgusted by the behavior that everyone was showing. The crowd had asked Paula and Marley to make a speech at the end of the night, and they got up to make one. By this time, I was tired and I wanted to go home, but in their speech, they began by talking about how grateful they were to have almost everyone in the room in their lives. That was only the first jab that they threw at me. They kept making many more, which the guests kept laughing at. At some point, I just got up and walked out. I ordered an Uber and went back home. I cried the entire way back home and up until Patrick got back home. When he got back, he seemed upset and angry. Why did you walk out like that? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? What? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me right now, Ingrid. I had to endure my parents yelling at me and a lot of the guests pitying me for being with you. Are you serious? What about how embarrassing it was for me? Oh, come on, Ingrid. You could deal with it for one night. It was my parents' anniversary, for God's sake. I was ignored by everyone, and your parents chose to make even more fun of me in their toast. How do you possibly expect me to be okay with something like that? I'm not saying what they did was right, but you could have just lived through it. I would have spoken to them about it after. What would that have done for me? I don't like being put in positions where I'm only being humiliated. Everyone was laughing at me. You've never been in that position before, so it's easy for you to talk about this like it's no big deal. My parents expect an apology from you. I want one too. I'm afraid that I won't be doing that. I'll only do that if they give me one too. As for your apology, I see no reason for apologizing to you. You always stood up for me. I don't see why this is any different. This is very different because, unlike before, you humiliated my family in front of all our guests, and your parents humiliated me, your wife, in front of all their guests. Maybe my parents were right about you. You're impossible. With that, Patrick went to sleep in the guest bedroom. I couldn't understand why he had a sudden change of behavior. Was it really that bad for him after I walked out? He was always the first person to stand up for me, especially considering the fact that I was usually bored with whatever his parents had to say about me. For me to walk out should have been the biggest signifier of just how bad they made me feel. Yet Patrick didn't seem to care about that. Patrick didn't talk to me for the next week. I also got a lot of texts from his parents, calling me ungrateful and an embarrassment. I tried to talk to Patrick, but he refused to. Eventually, I decided to give in and apologize to both him and his parents. Even that felt humiliating, but I was willing to go through it because I loved Patrick, and I didn't want this to be the hill I died on. Things after that only got worse for me. Patrick's parents retired and spent a lot of their time hosting family dinners. They hosted it once a week, and Patrick was always invited. The first time they hosted it, Patrick brought me along with him to their house. As soon as I stepped in, the atmosphere in the room got awkward. Paula was busy getting ready, so she didn't see me immediately, but Marley and the rest of Patrick's siblings awkwardly glanced at me. They didn't talk to me, and Patrick left me to stand by myself while he caught up with the rest of his family. When Paula came downstairs, she saw me and practically flew over to me in rage. "What are you doing here?" "Excuse me?" "No, I will not excuse you. What are you doing in my house right now?" "Well, you invited us for dinner." "Wrong. I invited Patrick because it's a family dinner. I'm Patrick's wife, so I'm a part of this family, am I not?" "Absolutely not. An orphan like you deserves no space in this family." "What? You thought you could hide the detail from us. We do background checks on our children's spouses, and you are not in my son's league whatsoever. I will never accept you here." "Why not? That can't be the only thing that determines whether I get to be a part of your family. You're ugly and poor. You'd never fit into our elite circles. I never want to see you again." "Why are you being so superficial? Are you scared that I'll damage your reputation just by existing? Does the fact that I bring your son happiness not satisfy you? If happiness brought in money, a lot of people would be billionaires. This is exactly why you'd never fit in with us. Or maybe I'll just never be as superficial as the rest of you because I value who a person actually is. You never even took the chance to get to know me before casting your judgments on me." "I'm glad I don't fit in with you, Ingrid. That's enough. Here's some money. Get yourself an Uber and leave." I stared at Patrick in shock as he held out the money. He shoved the money in my hands and turned back around towards his mother. She smirked at me. I felt tears spring into my eyes as I turned back around and walked out. I was once again crying in the Uber. I didn't understand why Patrick had changed so drastically. Was this his way of making up to his parents after the party? Whatever it was, I was hurt and angry at him. He was okay with his parents using my past as an insult and defending them instead of me, like he usually did. I wanted to yell and scream, but I knew that would only project a worse image of me and prove them right, which is why I walked away. I tried to think if anything I said was out of line, but I really did not see anything wrong. I was merely standing up for myself, calmly might I add. After Patrick came back home, he went back to not talking to me. My heart was breaking, and I felt so alone. I knew that he expected another apology, but I couldn't bring myself to do it like the last time. Paula had blatantly insulted me in the worst way, and Patrick was angry at me for it. If anything, I expected an apology from him. For the next 2 weeks, Patrick and I didn't speak to each other. It was hard at first, but I got used to it. Eventually, the dinners his family hosted still happened, and about once a week, I was all alone at home, which I truthfully did not mind. On one of those nights, my parents video called me. "Hey, honey." "Hey, sweetie. How's it going?" "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Mom. Things are not good. Why? What's wrong, sweetie? If you need help with anything, feel free to ask us. I don't think this is something you guys would be able to help me out with, but thanks for the offer. Where's Patrick? Is he not helping?" That's the thing. He's part of the problem. Huh? Sweetie, could you be a little more clear about what the problem is? Well, his parents are pretty wealthy and also very snobby. Oh, I hate those kinds of people. Tell me about it. Anyways, they thought that I was some poor girl who could never live up to their standards and fit into their elite circles. So they took it upon themselves to humiliate me every time that I met them. What the hell? Oh yeah, and the last time I went over, Patrick's mom decided calling me an orphan was a good insult. Oh, that woman. I'm going to claw her face off. How dare she call my precious child an orphan? Do they not know about us? And what the hell has Patrick been doing in all this? I didn't tell them about you guys because I knew that their opinion of me would change if they knew. And I wanted them to like me for who I was and not for my wealth. As for Patrick, he's siding with them. He thinks that I was disrespectful when I stood up for myself. Honey, are you sure this is the man you want to be with? I love him a lot, but this is not how I want it to be. We haven't been speaking to each other for the last 2 weeks, and I'm surprisingly okay with that. All right, sweetie. I'll get you in touch with one of my friends over there. As for your worry about us not being able to help you out, I think we might actually be able to help you get a little sweet revenge. Huh? What do you mean? Your dad and I are coming there next week. We wanted to take you and Patrick on a vacation, but now we can just take you. More things for us to do together, I guess. Really? Oh my God, I'm so excited to finally get to see the two of you in person. Again, that was a real pick-me-up. Finally, I felt happy after so long. The three of us continued to talk for a little while after that. Dad elaborated on his plan to help me. After a little while, he asked me where these dinners of theirs were being held. And as far as I knew, they took turns hosting in their house and at restaurants. Conveniently, the week that my parents were coming, the dinner was going to happen in a restaurant. I needed to get information on where exactly this dinner was going to be held, so I could provide my parents with the location. Thankfully, I had Patrick's email logged into my phone. And if there was one thing I knew about Paula and Marley, it was that they loved to email everyone everything. It wasn't that hard to get the location, and I gave it to my parents. At the same time, my mom's lawyer friend contacted me, and we got started on the process of filing for divorce. My parents landed in the States and decided to check into their hotel, where I met them. We had lunch together, and then the two of them sent me on my way for a spa day that they entirely paid for because they thought I deserved it while they got ready to get revenge on my in-laws. My parents walked into the restaurant that Patrick and his family were at. According to Dad, when they approached the table, Marley and Paula began to murmur among themselves as they recognized just who he was. Mom told me that this was how the conversation went. "Hello? Oh my gosh, Mr. Burns. What brings you here? Oh wow, I just happened to see some familiar faces, and I figured that I could drop in and probably dine with you. Familiar faces? Who are you speaking about, Mr. Burns? Well, I see Patrick. Me? Well, hello. A pleasure to meet you. You, my daughter, has spoken a lot about you. But speaking of my daughter, where is she? Your daughter? I'm afraid you're mistaken. I don't think she's here, but she should be, right? I'm sorry, Mr. Burns, but we didn't even know that you had a daughter. Of course I do. And she's married to Patrick. What? I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken. Yes, his wife's name is Ingrid, and she was an orphan. Yes, I do know that, and that is why we adopted her. Excuse me? You're her dad? Yes, and from what I see, she isn't here. She's been telling me that there has been some problems with her in-laws, but I see what the problem was. It was you. No, she was the one who hid this huge thing from us. If we knew, you would have treated her better. She didn't want you to treat her nicely because of her background. Oh well, she did ask me to hand this over to Patrick. My dad handed Patrick the divorce papers and walked out. After that, it only took a couple of phone calls for a lot of investors to pull away from Marley's business. They were quickly crashing, and nothing was more satisfying than watching them crumble down to the levels that they made fun of. I got a lot of texts from all Patrick's family, calling me a bunch of nasty names while some of them begged me to talk to my dad and reverse what he had done. Patrick thankfully signed the divorce papers without any hassle. My parents and I went on a long vacation after that. I had the time of my life, and I slowly began to heal. Yeah, it hurt that I had lost the love of my life, but I also learned just how important it is to stand up for myself. I'm forever grateful to my parents for everything they've done for me, and I can't wait to see what else life has to offer me.
On the other side of this heavy door, I can only imagine what they're thinking. Perhaps they're questioning my sanity, feeling quite unsettled by my absence. But their concerns are lost on me, and I have no interest in seeking their approval. With a cheerful grin, I waved at the trio of anxious figures beyond the door and called out, "Good luck making your way back safely." My name is Karen, a 32-year-old newlywed. Not long ago, my husband and I celebrated our first anniversary, and while we haven't started a family yet, I cherish this chapter of our lives. Before tying the knot, I adored embarking on solo day trips by train whenever I had a free day. My friends often asked if I didn't feel lonely traveling alone, but I discovered a unique joy in wandering at my own pace, free from a strict itinerary. Though there was a hint of solitude, the thrill of exploration always outweighed it. I have a beloved travel magazine that I sometimes turn to for inspiration on my adventures. As my routine unfolded, I began to notice a curious coincidence. Wasn't that the same man I saw last week? It happened so frequently that one might call it fate, if they believed in such things. At first, it was a little unsettling, but it turned out he felt the same way. One day, he approached me hesitantly, saying, I'm sorry if I'm mistaken, but haven't we met before in different places?" To break the awkwardness, I showed him my travel magazine and confidently explained that I was following one of its suggested trips. To my surprise, he revealed that he had the same magazine and smiled broadly. That's how I met Mason, my future husband. He was captivating with a carefree approach to travel, always packing light for his journeys while I tended to over-prepare. He joked, "With everything going cashless now, all you need is a mobile phone." Our conversation sparkled with excitement as we discovered our shared passion for travel. We exchanged contact details, and our solo trips gradually transformed into joint adventures. I delighted in the fact that sharing experiences made them even more memorable, and local delicacies tasted better when enjoyed with someone special. After about 8 months of dating, Mason proposed, and I couldn't have been happier. Just 8 months into our relationship, we made the joyful decision to marry, embarking on what I thought would be a blissful new chapter in our lives. However, this happiness was soon overshadowed by the presence of Mason's parents, Austin and Janet, who lived just a 25-minute drive away. Both in their 50s, with Janet working part-time while they remained active in the workforce, they initially visited our home quite often. However, over time, we found a comfortable balance with fewer visits. Our post-wedding life included regular trips to various tourist spots, continuing a tradition we both loved. Recently, Mason embraced a minimalist lifestyle, carrying only his mobile phone and leaving his wallet with me. It feels so light, I hardly look ready to go out, do I? He joked with a satisfied grin. I silently wished he would at least carry his wallet, but it was a minor inconvenience. Then one ordinary day took an unexpected turn when Mason casually suggested, "By the way, my parents' wedding anniversary is coming up. How about we invite them on our next trip?" I felt a sudden tightness in my chest at the suggestion, but I forced a smile and replied, "Yes, that sounds great. We haven't seen Janet and Austin recently anyway." Mason, oblivious to my discomfort, didn't notice the strain in my expression. The next day, when I called his parents to extend the invitation, they were thrilled. "I guess I have to give it my best shot," I thought, bracing myself. Honestly, I find it challenging to be around my in-laws. They aren't unpleasant people. We just don't seem to mesh well. I'm quite reserved and prefer calm environments, while they are the epitome of high energy, which can be overwhelming for me. The first time I met them, their boisterous enthusiasm took me by surprise. "Nice to meet you. I'm Mason's mom, and this is his dad," they declared with the gusto of stand-up comedians, causing me to tense up involuntarily. Later, when the four of us, Mason, his parents, and I, went out for dinner, they chose the restaurant. I wondered if it was one of their favorite spots, given their enthusiastic choice. When we arrived, I was greeted by the sight of an all-you-can-eat buffet. The idea of meeting their son's girlfriend for the first time in such an informal setting made me chuckle to myself. "We've been so anxious today that we haven't eaten anything since this morning," Janet exclaimed, her beaming smile seemingly immune to any nerves. "That's right, we need to get our money's worth," Austin chimed in, revealing the true reason behind their skipped breakfast. Their loud voices drew discreet chuckles from other diners, making me feel a bit embarrassed and eager to leave. I glanced around, hoping Mason shared my discomfort, but to my surprise, he had already headed off to get food. Not to be outdone, his parents also jumped up, ready to load their plates as if preparing for a long winter's hibernation. Watching them, I couldn't help but wonder, can I really become a part of this family? I managed only a strained smile amid their boisterous energy, finding myself barely able to touch my food as I wrestled with doubts about my future with Mason. However, my apprehensions softened a bit when they affectionately remarked at the end of our meal, "What a wonderful girlfriend Mason has. He may be a bit awkward, but please take good care of him, Karen." Their sincere words warmed my heart. I loved Mason, and despite their overwhelming nature, I believed his parents meant well. When Mason proposed a few months later, I accepted without hesitation, convinced of our bond. Yet it turned out I wasn't as skilled at reading people as I thought. At our wedding, Mason's parents seemed to overlook the solemnity of the ceremony. Their attention instead focused on the buffet, much to my own parents' dismay. Mason's brother Brian appeared to be the only one aware of the awkwardness. "I'm sorry my parents showed such an embarrassing side," he confessed, his face flushed. "It's really shameful." I learned from Brian that he lives alone and has a somewhat strained relationship with our in-laws. They once complained, "That boy is always so noisy with his complaints." Just recently, he had boasted about buying several eggs despite a one-per-person limit, to which I had scolded him. "Annoy," he retorted, "don't you feel guilty about benefiting yourself at the expense of others?" Hearing that made me realize the complexities of our new family dynamics. I couldn't help but wonder, isn't that a fair point? What's wrong with expecting a little consideration? My thoughts were stirred by a recent visit from my in-laws, Janet and Austin, to our new home. They arrived empty-handed, which wasn't an issue, but soon began rummaging through our shelves. "Isn't this the snack they're advertising on TV? I've been dying to try it. Oh, and this one too." They treated my carefully chosen snacks as though they were on a scavenger hunt. Mason, ever so nonchalant, told them, "If you want them, take them home." "That's fine, right, Karen?" I wanted to express my frustration right then and there, but all I managed was a forced smile. It was becoming clear that my in-laws were quite the moochers, their constant casualness wearing me down. The demands of "I want this" and "give me that" wore me down in the early days of our marriage. They visited weekly, and each encounter left me feeling increasingly on edge. One day, I finally couldn't hold back my irritation any longer. "Mason, Don't you think there's something off about Janet and Austin? They're kind of overbearing. My frustration boiled over into a full-blown argument, and Mason seemed genuinely perplexed by my anger. No, not really. They've always been like this. Don't worry about it, he said, patting my shoulder. That only fueled my irritation further. You kidding me? If this keeps up, I'll consider a divorce. My raised voice alarmed Mason, and he quickly intervened to put a stop to his parents' intrusive visits. Whatever he said to them worked, because our home life returned to a semblance of peace. However, the thought of traveling with them still made me anxious. On the day of the trip, I was taken aback to see them waiting, seemingly ready. It's been a while. I heard you've been busy with work. It must be tough, Janet said, trying to make conversation. Despite her words, I was far from calm, especially when I noticed something odd. Janet and Austin, where's your luggage? On closer inspection, I realized they hadn't brought anything with them, not even for a day trip. Isn't it normal to bring at least a bag? I asked. We wanted to be ready to move quickly, they explained, leaving me bewildered and bracing for whatever might come next. As I complained about a sore shoulder, the response felt all too familiar and only added to my confusion. The trip unfolded just as disastrously as I had feared. Soon, it became clear that my in-laws had conveniently forgotten their wallets, feeding surprise with a casual, "That's strange, isn't it?" I watched them play innocent, and my unease deepened. I found myself contemplating whether it would be better to cut the trip short or cancel it altogether. Unfortunately, my concerns fell on deaf ears. An exasperated Mason reassured me, "My folks have always been like this. I'll cover for them, but I'll make sure they pay me back." It seemed the trip would proceed as his parents laughed and offered hollow apologies. All I felt was disgust. Even after we arrived at our destination, their rudeness continued. At a store, they complained loudly about the lack of free samples, exclaiming, "Wow, stingy, huh?" When I bought a drink and hadn't even taken a sip, Janet asked, "Can I have a sip? I'm thirsty too. I can't believe I forgot my wallet." I forced a smile as Mason finally intervened, saying, "Stop it, it's embarrassing. Look, I'll buy you one." Overhearing this, Austin muttered under his breath, "What a stingy woman." I bristled at his lack of compassion, thinking bitterly, I could say the same about you. I should have walked away then, but my stubbornness kept me there. The pattern repeated itself 2 more times. After seemingly enjoying our first trip, Janet contacted Mason to plan another. When I saw them at the station platform again, a chill ran down my spine. This time, they remembered their wallets. But when it came time to pay, Austin exclaimed, "Oh no, this is the wallet I used before." I rushed out in such a hurry. Their blatant lie was something only Mason seemed willing to believe. On the 3rd trip, they forgot their wallets again. By then, it was clear their forgetfulness was intentional. I confronted Janet directly, asking, "Excuse me, but did you deliberately forget your wallet? You never intended to pay, did you?" My accusation made her face flush with anger, and Austin snapped back, "What a rude woman." Apologized to Janet. Fueled by long-held frustration, I stood my ground. "No way, both of you are just too greedy." Caught in the heated exchange, Mason appeared at a loss while curious tourists around us began to watch the spectacle. Noticing their gazes, Mason felt embarrassed and finally pleaded, "Stop it, please." Overwhelmed by the entire ordeal, I broke down in tears, feeling utterly disillusioned. As the confrontation reached its peak, the in-laws' reaction took an unexpected turn. Janet rushed over to a tearful Mason and, with Austin silently by her side, said, "I'm sorry, Mason. It was my fault. You're so kind to cry for me." I stood there, bewildered by their melodramatic response, my mind racing with one clear thought. This is impossible. All I could think was that I wanted a divorce as I watched tears stream down Mason's cheeks. Sensing the gravity of the situation, his parents lost their previously combative demeanor. "Karen, we know we're often in the wrong," they admitted. "It's Mason's money, but we've still taken advantage of him." Their repetition of "it's Mason's money" dripped with a sarcasm that revealed their lack of genuine remorse, confirming my suspicions that their forgetfulness about their wallets was intentional. Janet casually referred to Mason's money, oblivious to the fact that Mason and I both contributed to our finances. His salary was only slightly higher than mine, making our incomes nearly equal. Every outing with the in-laws recently had ended with them wanting something. "I want to buy this too. Maybe some gifts for the neighbors as well." "What's that? Looks tasty." "Hey Mason, buy that for me." Their endless demands had racked up shockingly high bills on Mason's credit card, and we had been living primarily off my salary for the past few months. At the time of our marriage, I had viewed our finances as shared, believing in spending within our means and not burdening each other. What infuriated me the most was Mason's reliance on cash during our travels. "What? Only cash here?" he exclaimed, pulling out his nearly empty wallet from my bag, which contained just a few coins. "No, I messed up. You know I don't carry cash," he said, devoid of malice. This still angered me, especially since I always covered my expenses. I couldn't help but feel that his parents thought I was freeloading off Mason's income while simply complaining. We split our living expenses, so their accusations were not only unfounded but deeply unpleasant. As I watched Mason cry, with Austin attempting to console him, I had a moment of introspection. "I'm sorry for being presumptuous," I finally said, deciding to diffuse the tension. "You guys go ahead on the train. I'll buy some drinks." Though reluctant, this decision was my attempt to restore some temporary peace. With a serene smile, I watched as Mason and the in-laws boarded the train. Their expressions shifted from happiness to panic when they realized I wasn't following. Sensing something amiss, Mason texted me, "Karen, are you coming? The train is about to leave." As the train doors began to close, I could see the panic etched on Mason's face. He seemed to be shouting something, but I was busy replying to his message. "I'm divorcing you. If your parents are so important to you, then live happily with them. Goodbye." I turned my back on Mason's frantic calls and texts, contemplating whether he even recognized the chaos he was causing on the train. Through the closing doors, his expression shifted from confusion to anger. "Hey, open this door. Are you crazy? I won't forgive you," he shouted, as if I needed his approval. I could see his parents yelling too, but their voices were drowned out in the noise of the train. Smiling at the bewildered trio, I muttered to myself, "Let's see if you make it back safely. Good luck." The train pulled away swiftly, vanishing from sight. As it departed, I felt a mix of relief and defiance. Knowing the next stop was quite a distance away, I hurried home to pack my things. I decided to stay with a friend while I figured out my next steps. Meanwhile, the barrage of messages from Mason continued until they abruptly stopped. His phone likely died. He often forgot to charge it overnight, and just that morning he mentioned it was at only 30%. Portable battery chargers are essential, he often said. Ironically, his essential charger was in my bag, along with his wallet. As I discussed my situation with my friend, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Brian, Mason's brother. "Karen, I'm sorry. Did something happen?" he asked. Brian explained that Mason's phone had run out of battery, and in his panic, he had dropped it, shattering the screen. Unable to contact me, the desperate in-laws turned to Brian. Instead of probing, he listened as I recounted everything about Mason and his parents, speaking without restraint. I could hear Brian's tone sharpen as I spoke. In the background, I caught snippets of the in-laws insisting that Brian, known for his articulate nature, would surely outmaneuver me in this argument. After I finished, Brian snapped, his voice taking on an authoritative edge. "Hey, you scoundrel. Are you stupid?" When Brian grew truly angry, his imposing demeanor surfaced. As the voice of reason, his words carried weight, and the in-laws' loud bickering echoed in the background. Choosing that moment, I quietly ended the call. Though Mason had initially been unsettled by the idea of divorce, my firm stance communicated through a lawyer led him to reluctantly accept the separation. Later, Brian confided that the in-laws had a notorious reputation, disliked not only by neighbors but also by those they had known in school. When Mason moved back to his parents' house, he quickly became the subject of local gossip, and now all three of them seldom ventured outside. Mason's colleagues, unsure how to address the rapid divorce, began to treat him cautiously as if he were a sensitive topic. Finding some humor in the situation, Brian shared that the in-laws were infamous even at the local supermarket for their shameless antics, such as demanding discounts on nearly expired items or asking for freebies due to minor damages. He expressed his long-standing embarrassment and disdain for their behavior, noting that their actions were influenced by a gambling addiction, which explained their constant search for bargains and seemingly insatiable hunger. When people asked me about the reason for my divorce, I simply mentioned a fundamental difference in values. Tolerating such behavior would require an extraordinarily broad-minded person, something I realized I could not be. Since the divorce, I've continued my work and even taken on a side job as a freelance writer, inspired by the success of my travel blog, which caught the attention of a publisher. My passion for travel has seamlessly blended with my new writing assignments, and I've discovered that traveling solo suits me best. Last month, my writing earned me a decent income, enabling me to plan a vacation to a distant resort for some much-needed relaxation. At just 32 years old, I feel like my life is truly just beginning, filled with new possibilities and free from the turmoil that once clouded my happiness.
Checking my phone, I discovered 13 missed calls, all from my mother-in-law, Martha. Not again, I thought. As I pondered this, my phone vibrated once more. I answered, and Martha's voice, filled with anger, came through. "Excuse me, isn't the allowance for this month $3,000 due?" she demanded. "Excuse me," I retorted. "I'll send the allowance once this month's payment is deposited." Martha raged, completely disregarding my circumstances and only expressing her own desires. I had enough of her. Even in this situation, she didn't reflect on her words and actions. I felt I had no choice but to resort to my last option. I pulled myself together and bled out to my phone. "Your son has passed away, so I can no longer send the allowance. My name is Jennifer Smith, 32 years old. I'm a busy working woman at a major financial firm and also a housewife." I continued, "I got married about 2 years ago. I met my beloved husband Mark through our shared hobbies. He was kind to everyone, and I was attracted to his warm smile, quickly developing feelings for him. Apparently, he felt the same way, and after dating for a year, we immediately got engaged. We both believed that we wouldn't meet anyone better than each other. We were living together while dating, and without any major quarrels, we decided to marry. Everything went smoothly for us, but here's where a problem arose. Martha, my mother-in-law. My father-in-law had passed away a few years ago, and since Mark didn't have any siblings, his only family was Martha. The trouble started when I first visited her home to introduce myself before our wedding. "Nice to meet you, Martha," I said, trying to be polite. She clearly showed a displeased expression. "So, you're Mark's fan, huh?" she said. "Yes, my name is Jennifer Miller." "You're a rather plain girl. I wonder what Mark sees in you," she remarked. I couldn't tell if she was joking or seriously meant what she said. Having such words directed at me by the mother of my loved one, I was quite shocked. Seeing my state, Mark frowned at Martha. "Hey, Mom, what's with the sudden harsh words? How can you say such things to the person I chose?" Mark questioned. "No, Mark. I'm just trying to choose a suitable woman for you," she replied. "Choose? I'm the one who chose her. You have no right to meddle. Don't say it in such a cold way. I'm just telling the truth because I care about you. If you were really thinking of me, you'd simply support us. Why can't you understand such a simple thing?" The air turned heavy as an argument unfolded between mother and son right before my eyes. Given that this was my first meeting with Martha, I wasn't in a position to intervene. Although the atmosphere remained awkward, we ultimately managed to express our intent to marry. As we were leaving, Martha called out to Mark, sounding somewhat disgruntled. "Mark, can I have a word? You're going to keep that promise after you get married, right?" "What promise?" Mark inquired. "You know about the allowance or that?" "Yes, I'll be sure to take care of that. Can we not discuss it here, please?" Mark seemed uncomfortable, and the atmosphere between my husband and his mother was tense, thick with discomfort in the car on the way home. I approached Mark to address the lingering concern that had been bothering me. "Hey, Mark, about the conversation you had with your mom as we were leaving," I began. Mark sighed deeply and began to speak slowly. "Yeah, I should have told you about it, Jennifer. I heard something about an allowance after my dad passed away. I've been sending money to my mom every month." "How much?" I asked. $22,000. $2,000? I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. Mark continued, "Actually, my mom has a debt. She lost a lot of money at a casino a long time ago. She's still paying it off, and because her health isn't great these days, she spends a lot of time at home. But she still needs money to live on." $2,000? Isn't that a bit too much? I questioned. If I try to lower the amount, she keeps calling me over and over. And no matter what, a mother is still a mother. I worry about her living alone. I understood that Mark was devoted to his mother. However, 2 months after our wedding, during my lunch break one day, I received a phone call from Martha. When I answered, she began to speak in a cheerful tone. "Jennifer, long time no see. Can we chat for a bit?" I hesitated before replying, "Yes, what can I do for you?" "You could start sending me money," she said. I was so taken aback that I couldn't find the words to respond. However, Martha seemed excited to continue the conversation. "You mentioned before that you're working for a financial company, right? That means you have a good salary, doesn't it?" she inquired. "Well, not exactly," I replied, avoiding eye contact. "Are you lying to avoid giving me money?" Martha's tone turned accusatory. "That's not what I mean," I explained. "But Martha, you're still receiving financial support from Mark, aren't you?" In response to my question, Martha defiantly replied, "So what?" I stated what I felt. "Martha, receiving $2,000 in monthly support is a big deal, and yet you're asking for more, really." Martha questioned, "If you were to send me an additional $1,000, I could avoid burdening Mark." Confused, I asked, "What do you mean by that?" Martha elaborated, "Well, I have Mark as a guarantor for my debts. If I fail to make payments, the debt collectors will go after him. Do you understand?" "But aren't you using part of Mark's $2,000 to pay back the debt?" I inquired. Martha admitted, "I'm short. I haven't told Mark, but I have a significant amount of debt." From Martha's tone, it was apparent that this was a fact even her husband was unaware of. Having children in the future would increase our expenses. Additionally, taking over Martha's debt was not an easy task. If Martha's payments fell behind and the debt fell onto Mark, the interest would likely have accumulated significantly by that time. If I refused to send money, it would eventually become a problem for my husband as well. It was better for Martha to pay off her debt now. Thinking along those lines, I reluctantly agreed to Martha's proposal. "All right, I'll start sending you money," I conceded. Martha seemed relieved, saying, "Really good, Jennifer. I knew you would say that. The total, with Mark's contribution, will be $3,000. But this means you can pay off your debt, right?" "Yes, of course." "I should be able to pay it all off in about a year," Martha assured. I pressed, "You promise, right? You'll make sure to pay off all your debts." Martha agreed, and I said, "I get it, so I'll be expecting it from this month onwards." She ended the call abruptly. Physical exhaustion from work, combined with this emotional burden, only added to my stress. $1,000 a month was going to be rough, but it was also to prevent future problems for us. After all, if Martha couldn't make a living, it would upset Mark as well. That night, I promptly reported the matter to my husband. He listened attentively and said I didn't have to do this, but I had already given my word to Martha, and it was a decision made for our future well-being. Mark expressed his gratitude and understanding, even as he maintained a sorry expression throughout. Time flew by, and 2 years had passed since then. The financial aid we thought would end in a year was still ongoing, and even now, we were transferring $3,000 every month to Martha. What's more, about 2 months ago, Mark fell ill and has been unable to go to work. He's on sick leave, so he's receiving disability benefits, but it's a mere pittance compared to his previous salary. Last month, I managed to transfer $3,000 to Martha from my savings, but it would be very challenging if this situation continues. Unbelievably, Martha has not once come to visit her sick son. We have told her about his hospitalization, but she doesn't show up to see him and only contacts me to ask, "You're still sending the money, right?" I was so angry that I decided to confront Mark about the issue. Mark, don't you think it's wrong that Martha is only concerned about money, even though you're in such a state? We need to think seriously about what to do going forward, I said. Mark agreed, saying, Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to put more strain on you, Jennifer. This month, too, she's been bombarding me with calls and messages, asking if we sent the money yet. Are you serious? How can she only think about money when her own son is sick? Mark showed his anger at his mother, his face slightly tense. Then, as if he had an idea, Mark exclaimed, That's it, and wore a sly grin. What is it, Mark? I asked. Well, this is our last resort. I've come up with something good for my mom, Mark suggested. What Mark proposed was a plan I could never have imagined. Although it could be called inappropriate, it seemed to be the only way to make Martha understand. A few weeks later, Mark was discharged from the hospital. Martha didn't reply to any of our messages, so we didn't tell her about Mark's discharge in the last 2 weeks. Martha's relentless demands for money had reached a point of absurdity. It seemed pointless to continue sending funds to a mother who showed no concern for her son. While Mark and I were enjoying a cup of tea, my phone buzzed with a message. Upon checking, I found 13 missed calls from Martha. As I pondered this, my phone vibrated again, signaling another call from her. Hello, I answered, turning on the speaker microphone so that Mark could hear. Martha started shouting immediately. Listen, where's the $33,000 for this month? Excuse me, that's right. The money for this month hasn't been transferred yet, I replied. I began to explain Mark's situation, but she interrupted, showing no empathy. I don't care if he's in the hospital or whatever. It's none of my business. You're working at a good place, right? You must have plenty of savings. Hurry up and transfer it here, Martha shouted angrily. Incredibly, she went on to say something outrageous. Listen, since you married Mark, if he can't pay, you have to pay me. Understand? If you refuse, I'll make you the guarantor. Got it? At that moment, something inside me snapped. She was openly displaying her desires without considering our situation at all. I had reached my breaking point. I firmly declare into my smartphone, Mark has passed away. I can't send you any more money. At these words, Martha blurted out, baffled, What? Yes, this was the last resort that my husband suggested, to lie to Martha about Mark's death and observe her reaction. If she showed any sign of sadness, if she reflected on her behavior and apologized, we would continue to support her financially. But if she didn't reflect, if she demanded money, we would cut ties completely. Deep down, I thought that even a money-grubbing woman like Martha would deeply reflect on her actions if she were told that her own son had died. However, the very next moment, Martha burst into loud laughter. Yay, what's so funny? I asked. Well, isn't it obvious? If Mark is dead, that means his inheritance will be distributed to me too. Excuse me, I've been looking into it since I heard that Mark was sick. Listen here, 2/3 of Mark's assets are yours, but 1/3 is mine. I was at a loss for words. I never thought that when she first heard her son was sick, she wouldn't look into treatment, but rather into how the inheritance would be divided. My anger surpassed. I was simply dumbfounded, and my husband appeared to feel the same way. As our eyes met, he slowly nodded, signaling to continue with the plan. I once again addressed Martha in a strong tone. Martha, did you hear what I said? Mark is dead. I heard. What about it? Aren't you sad your own son passed away before you? She callously responded. You just make sure to send me. I won't let you get away with not doing it, I exclaimed. However, with a click, the phone line was abruptly cut off, and a dial tone echoed. Glancing at my husband, I saw that he was visibly shaking with a face red with anger. Mark, are you okay? I asked. My husband looked into my eyes and said, I'm cutting ties with her. She'll likely come here eventually, demanding my money. Let's wait until then, okay? But are you really okay with this? Cutting off ties just like that? I inquired. Yeah, I have no regrets. After that call, she's no mother, my husband replied, his eyes filled with hatred, and I felt the same way. A person who only thinks about money over her own son's life is not family to me. A few days later, as we expected, Martha came to our house. For the time being, I decided to hide my husband in the next room and deal with Martha myself. She approached me with a face like a demon. "Hey, give me Mark's inheritance right now," she demanded again. With that, anything else to say? He's already dead, isn't he? It's pointless to say anything now, I retorted. Yet you never even visited him. What are you saying? Are you really his mother? You're so annoying. Give me the inheritance right away. I don't mind dating a lawyer, Martha persisted. Speaking more would be a waste of time, I thought. Just as I thought that, my husband emerged from the next room. Seeing him, Martha let out a startled gasp, as if she had seen a ghost. "Mama." Mark said, "YW dead? Long time no, Mom, sorry, but the news about my death was a lie," Mark explained. "A lie? How could you be so disrespectful?" Martha responded. "I wanted to confirm your true nature, Mom. I was curious about how you'd handle the allowance if your son died. But you turned out to be a gold digger, just as I suspected." "I got that perfectly," I added. "What? How dare you call your mother a gold digger?" Martha protested. "Silence. I'm cutting ties with a toxic parent like you," Mark shouted. Martha's mouth was agape at my husband's angry shouts. She could not come to terms with the fact that her own son was severing ties with her. "What? What does this mean, Mark?" she stammered. "It means exactly what I said. I can't consider someone like you as my mother. No way." "What about the allowance?" Martha asked, panicked. "Do you really think I would? You're on your own with the debts." "We're moving," Mark said firmly. "Wait, please. If you do that, what about my living expenses?" Martha tearfully pleaded, reaching out to my husband. He forcefully shook off her hand, looked at her coldly, and said, "I don't care about your living expenses. You have been living off us without even a single apology. I really understand your despicable nature now. Don't you dare show up in front of us again." "No, wait, Mark." Martha called out as my husband grabbed her arm and dragged her to the front door. He threw her shoes and bag outside and chased Martha out of the house. She made a fuss outside for a while but disappeared after a bit, perhaps unable to withstand the eyes of the neighbors. She tried contacting us multiple times, but we ignored all of her attempts. We set Martha's number to be automatically rejected, and we finished moving. Regarding the matter of co-signing for the debts, it became invalid since Martha had made Mark the co-signer without his consent, and therefore he was not responsible. Without the allowance from us, Martha seems to be leading a miserable life. It's only natural, as she had been using the allowance for her gambling habits instead of paying off her debts. She still has a mountain of debts and is chased by debt collectors every day. She can't gamble anymore and seems to be working from dawn to dusk. For the foreseeable future, it's unlikely that she will be able to pay off her debts completely. She will have to keep working until she is unable to move. This is entirely her own doing. As for us, we are spending fulfilling days in our new home. My husband's condition has stabilized, and he has returned to work. After some time, there's a new life growing in my belly. We're going to have an additional member in our family next year. From now on, we want to spend happy days as a family of 3.